Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Subcommittee on Ontario Place. I am the clerk for this committee, and the first item of business is item 1, election of the chair. Members, are there any nominations for chair? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to nominate Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. Councillor Layton has nominated Councillor Cressy. I will call for nominations again. Are there any further nominations? I'm calling for nominations a second time. Are there any further nominations for chair? I'm calling for nominations a third and final time. Are there any further nominations for chair? Hearing no further nominations, I declare the nominations are now closed. As Councillor Cressy is the only nominee, he is declared chair of the Subcommittee on Ontario Place.
All right. Well, listen, it is a full house on a Tuesday evening here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just so everybody is aware of the order that's going to be taking place here today, we will begin with a brief presentation from City of Toronto staff who are kindly spending their Tuesday night with us, all of whom are on my right. We then have a full list of speakers who will hear from the public. You'll have a chance to depute for 5 minutes, and there's opportunity for questions, and then we will bring it into committee for questions of staff and for council members, Councillor Fletcher, Layton and Perks to speak. Before we begin, the members of our committee, we gratefully acknowledge that the Subcommittee on Ontario Place meets on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. At this point, I should acknowledge that Councillor Stephanie Laforme of the Mississaugas of the Credit is here, and I'd ask you to stand so we can welcome you. Thank you. And so to Councillor Stephanie Laforme, thank you for attending. And I should note for members of the audience that the Mississaugas of the Credit, I've been asked to share on behalf of Chief Laforme that they have filed a formal claim over the lands where Ontario Place is. And so I've been asked to share that on behalf of Chief Laforme. And Stephanie, Councillor Laforme, thank you very much for being here. I have a recommendation. So we have a list of 30, before we do that, do we have any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. We have a list of 36 people who have registered to speak here tonight, and you'll each have up to 5 minutes to speak, followed by questions. If you haven't yet registered and would like to, we're going to try to break the world record for the longest committee meeting ever. Councillor Layton only has 2 young daughters, so he has no rush to get home to them. But if you would like to register to speak, I'd ask, we're going to close registrations at 6 p.m. And so for the next 25 minutes, if you would like to put your name on the list to speak, you can go and speak to clerks over on my right, the 2 very friendly faces waving their hands. So if you haven't registered, please feel free to do so. With that, we're going to begin with a presentation from City of Toronto staff, and we have Linda McDonald here from City Planning. Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy, and thank you, councillors, and also the many people who have come out to join us tonight. The main reason for this meeting is not to listen to me talk, but to hear what you have to say. So I will provide a brief overview on, some of the background on Ontario Place, a little bit of history, and go over some of the sort of existing principles and policy framework for Ontario Place. The reason we're here today is at the request of Toronto and East York Community Council, planning was asked to set up a meeting, or the clerks set up a meeting and set up the meeting so that people could come and speak and provide their input and thoughts on Ontario Place and its future, and that we would be able to report back on what's come out of this meeting and any principles that we may want to move forward with. I'm going to start with a little bit of background. We'll go over some recent initiatives, what's happened at Ontario Place since it was built in 1971, where we are today, and then I'll go over the Centre Waterfront Plan, which is our main policy document. So as most of you know, Ontario Place was built in 1971. It took them 18 months to build it, and it was really in a response to the success of the Ontario Pavilion at Expo 67. The then Premier at the time, John Roberts, wanted it to be really a showcase. We wanted it to represent the economic growth in Ontario, showcase our culture, and also provide a place where people could celebrate Ontario, what it meant to them, and find a place where they could enjoy the waterfront of Lake Ontario. Ontario Place is the land, the islands, are primarily owned by the province. On this slide, you can see the darker sort of blue shading on it represents waterfront parcels and a little bit of land which is actually owned by the City of Toronto. So that water that runs effectively between Ontario Place and Exhibition Place is owned by the City of Toronto. Ontario Place, or the province of Ontario, owns Ontario Place proper, including an extension into the water. So they do own water lots that extend beyond the actual land boundaries of the island that Ontario Place sits on. So over the past decades, a number of different initiatives have taken place across the waterfront. So the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, which was developed over a number of years with many, many consultation meetings, was adopted by Council in 2003. And it was really to look at a comprehensive approach to the waterfront and how we actually approach it all the way from Maryland Bell Park out to the eastern end to Ashbridges Bay. And it was formulated based on 4 major core principles in terms of how we would move forward with any change on the waterfront. In 2012, John Tory, before his tenure as mayor of the city, was chair of a provincial agency that looked at the future of Ontario Place and came up with a report on what the province should look at in terms of any revitalization of the property. This was based on, again, a very wide consultation which included all of the citizens of Ontario, the number of town halls which brought in commentary from the entire province. And his resulting report really looked at the importance of Ontario Place as maintaining open space and parkland, how it needed to keep open access to the waterfront so that people could actually come onto the shore of Lake Ontario. And he saw it as a waterfront that allowed you to basically live, work, play, discover. So a real mix and dynamic range of uses. It also identified the opportunity for partnerships to allow this province to access other revenue sources and partners who could help them revitalize the grounds. In 2014, the province issued a statement of cultural heritage value that acknowledged the significance of Ontario Place and its reflection of the prosperity post-World War II and celebrating our centennial, the Canadian centennial. It represented a whole new kind of modern approach to development, and the design was done by Eberhard Zeidler, a famous Toronto architect, well recognized. Michael Huff was a landscape architect, again, a internationally recognized landscape architect, and also a very innovative playground designer, Eric McMillan, who was known for his new approach to playgrounds and that children's village that either you or your children probably enjoyed over the years. Ontario Place was also recognized in 1994 as having international heritage and cultural value by an international agency. In 2017, the province opened the Trillium Park and William Davis Trail, which I think many of you have probably enjoyed, through an investment of $30 million in the property, and that is on the eastern boundary of Ontario Place, which formerly was used more for service operations and parking to serve the park. The city has a couple of initiatives underway right now at Exhibition Place. We've always looked at the interface between Exhibition Place and Ontario Place. A project that we're working on right now is a cultural heritage landscape assessment for Exhibition Place. We expect to complete that and be able to report out in May of this year on our findings from that. And then we'll be moving forward on a master planning process for Exhibition Place, which will look at some of the synergies and connections between Ontario Place and Exhibition Place to help inform that master planning process. And that we expect to complete in late this year or early in 2020. The waterfront transit reset. We've done a lot of work on waterfront transit planning and the interface between TTC and GO Transit and improving transit for the growing population. We have an update underway on that and looking at a better interlining of TTC, the Dufferin Loop, the Exhibition Place Stadium, creating better access to this end of the waterfront. Last year, City Council approved the new downtown plan known as TO Core. That included a Parks and Public Realm plan that looked comprehensively at Parks and Public Realm for the entire downtown, but particularly looked at what we call the shoreline stitch, and the idea of how important it is to connect parks across the waterfront and to make sure that we maintain public access across the entire waterfront of the city. Ontario Place is open to the public. Right now, in 2018, they received approximately 1 million visitors. Many of you know that there are a number of events that are hosted through the seasons, different arts and cultural events. The Budweiser Stage has been very popular, successful destination for summer concerts. Cinesphere has recently reopened with new films and events happening and drawing more people to Ontario Place. The marina, which was built as part of the original Ontario Place as they sunk 2 battleships to create that kind of breakwater, has continued to operate throughout the decades. And many of you have probably seen the announcement that Cirque du Soleil will be coming there this fall for their visit to Toronto. One of the regulations on Ontario Place is that there is an airport zoning regulation. Because of its proximity to Billy Bishop Airport and the importance of maintaining a safe approach and departure lines to the airport, there are restrictions on title which limit the height of any structures that are on Ontario Place. Particularly as you are at the eastern limit closest to Billy Bishop, there are fairly stringent height restrictions. In January of this year, the province announced that it was intending to release a request for expressions of interest for Ontario Place, and that they would be looking for proposals potentially for the entire site or parts of, and set some conditions in that in terms of maintaining parkland and restrictions on no residential uses, and also that they would not be selling any of Ontario Place. So moving on to kind of the principles that we have in place right now. There is a planning framework that covers Ontario Place. The Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, which I said was adopted in 2003. This is the policy document that's been guiding all of our redevelopment on the eastern waterfront and covers the waterfront all the way from the west, Maryland Bell Park, across to Ashbridges Bay out in the east end. This plan has been used to inform all our development in the east, and it's founded on 4 major core principles. The first principle, removing barriers, making connections, was focused on the fact that the waterfront needed to create a stronger connection to the rest of the city, so that we needed the north-south connections in order to get across the barrier of Lakeshore Boulevard and the Gardiner and the railways, which had tended to disengage the waterfront, and also the importance of the east-west connection so that you could move seamlessly from the very eastern end of the waterfront through to the west end. And that's something that's important for Ontario Place, is how those connections continue, and also making sure that those connections connect the heritage and cultural assets along the waterfront. Principle number 2 speaks specifically about how we maintain and expand our waterfront parks and public spaces. We've been building a new network of parks in the East Bayfront with the opening of new parks, and the idea was that this would create a continuous public waterfront promenade across the central waterfront, and that each of those would be connected so that you could make your way from end to end. Clearly, Ontario Place, and that's a part of the waterfront, is very important to that. In the Central Waterfront Plan, there is a very specific policy, which is shown verbatim on this slide, speaking to the importance of Ontario Place being woven into it and making sure that we continue to support it as a major waterfront destination, and we continue to support the innovation in architecture and landscape architecture, which was demonstrated with a very early construction of the facility. Number 3, there are only 4, I'm almost done. Promoting a clean and green environment is really focused on the importance of maintaining a sustainable waterfront, and that we're sensitive to the environment, we're sensitive to the health and biodiversity of the waterfront, and that in terms of lake filling will only be considered if it is specifically to stabilize or improve the waterfront, to protect natural environments, such as the work we've been doing on the renaturalization of the mouth of the Don, changing the waterfront but bringing it back to create a more healthy Lake Ontario. The final principle, creating dynamic and diverse new communities. This really talks about the need for the waterfront to be a place where people can live, work, and play, where you can come down to the waterfront and you can achieve it on many different levels, and that we also protect the tourism value of it, the recreational value, the publicness, and as part of any development or change on the waterfront, that we make sure we respect the sort of heritage and cultural properties that exist there that reflect how we came to be the city we are today. So with those 4 core principles, they provide a fairly high-level direction as to what we expect to happen across the waterfront, including Ontario Place. We're using those as kind of a starting point tonight, food for thought about, do they still make sense? Do they need to be updated? Do they need to be refined? Very interested in hearing what you have to say about what your thoughts are. And in terms of feedback, we're sort of looking at examples of ideas that perhaps build on these core principles as we look at how you revitalize and bring Ontario Place into the 21st century. How do you build on what's been done with Trillium Park and the William G. Davis Trail already? Some of the key heritage assets we know that are in that area and adjacent to it. And then continuing to work with that integration of Ontario Place and Exhibition Place as 2 very important public bodies, public properties that can benefit each other. So I'll leave that slide up and I will pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it. To members of the committee, the suggestion is to proceed to deputants before questions of city staff, if that's okay with you. All right, so thank you, Linda. We'll come back for questions from the committee of staff after we've heard from the public. 2 housekeeping items before we begin. We have an absolutely packed house today, and if you don't have a chair, there is an overflow room in Committee Room 2, which is just outside. And I would note that the building here actually closes at 9:30. So if we're still going and you want to pop out to get coffee, make sure you're back in before 9:30. Just before we begin comments, just one editorial comment. As you've seen in the presentation, while the province owns much of the land, they do not own all of the land. In fact, the city owns part of it. And so the province cannot go alone when it comes to Ontario Place. They have announced their intention to reimagine it, but the people of Toronto should have a say. That's why you're here today. The City of Toronto must have a say, and that's why we will be looking to develop as a City Council our principles and priorities to guide any conversations. With that, we're going to move into an opportunity to hear from you. Our first speaker, and I'll ask you when you come up to come straight up to the table in front of us, is Catherine Tate, and you'll have 5 minutes. And coming after Catherine, just so people are ready, we have Sarah Van Exen and then Cynthia Wilkie. Is Catherine Tate here? Catherine Tate. Okay. If Catherine does arrive, I'll ask if she can let the clerks know and we can move to bring her back on. Sarah Van Exen. Is Sarah here? I am. You are. Sarah, come on up. You'll have 5 minutes, and there's a clock just to my right that you can see on the wall so that you can check your time. And you can begin anytime you're ready.
Okay. This is an overwhelming sized room. I'm probably going to talk pretty quick. Okay, so my name is Sarah. I just wanted to thank you for having me and thank you for taking the time to hear from the public about this. I live in Ward 9, that's Anna Bailau's ward, and I don't bring any personal or professional expertise with me. In fact, I'm a little worried that my comments are going to be a bit too high level. I'm just here because I love Ontario Place. I grew up in a small town with farm fields surrounding my schools, and I spent a significant amount of time at Ontario Place. I would say an almost weird amount of time at Ontario Place as a kid, and then as a teen, and I still get there a lot. I won't dwell because I know that nostalgia is not helpful here, and neither is a super narrow local view of a provincial property. But my views of Ontario Place's future are absolutely shaped by how I felt when the Cinesphere and the pods would come into view from the Gardner. It made it clear I'd arrived somewhere that was way more interesting than the farm fields that were around me, and remarkable. And that was way before my eyes ever set sight on the CN Tower or the city skyline. Also, the thrill of it as a teen of being allowed to take the GO train without my parents and spend all my babysitting money on concerts. And, watching fireworks or running the water slides. And then more recently, as a Torontonian, of trudging with friends or piggybacking a kid across the X's seemingly endless expanse of parking lots, because music and art and skating amongst the woods and near the shore is completely magical, even when it's on plastic ice. Like a lot of Ontarios whose comments I've read in the papers, I'd like to see an Ontario Place that continues to embody much of what it was originally intended to be, and that has left such a mark on my memories, but in a format that's relevant for today's times. Like a lot of Torontonians who are commenting for a second time around, for me that means no casino, because there would go the concept of a space that's safe for kids and teens and a place that complements rather than competes with the city that houses it. It means recognizing that the pods and Cinesphere are likely nationally, or we heard internationally, significant heritage assets that are valued by Ontarians and of interest to tourists. It means not just maintaining, but enhancing the connection to the lake and the natural surroundings, which makes it hard to see how a mall fits in here, or could fit in here, and providing public access to the site. I personally think it means developing some of those miles of parking lots at the X at the same time to create an accessible and ideally seamless bridge of green down to Ontario Place, and adding residential and hotel accommodation and transit to connect more people to both places more easily. I think it means carrying forward recent efforts to make these destinations 4 seasons, and being open to a science center move, which I know is complicated, but it would give Ontario Place an anchor in a post-Expo era. I think it means figuring out how to get smaller music venues back on these sites to profile our music industry, which is world-class, and to make music affordable there again. I think it means remembering that Ontario Place was created to profile Ontario to the world, and that technology, Canadian technology, was a key to delivery. Through the north of Superior at the Cinesphere film and North Now, that section of Ontario Place helped us to feel connected to the rest of our enormous province, which most of us have never seen more than a small fraction of. Recognizing that we've got one of the biggest interactive digital media sectors in the world, I would love to see Ontario Place use it to continue to connect us by showcasing the whole of the province, including the North and Ontario's Indigenous cultural heritage, which surveys show us are of much greater interest to foreign tourists, and I would say of value to us. Foreign tourists have their own giant Ferris wheels at home, but they don't have those things. I have one last thing to say. When I told my mom, who lives in Hamilton, that I was commenting tonight, she sent me a letter she wrote to the editor in 1971, and in it she quotes Globe journalist Richard Needham, who said, "Ontario Place is not so much something to do or to see or to hear, but it's somewhere to be." I know that's vastly oversimplifying things, but it sums up how I want to feel about Ontario Place in a nutshell. Thank you.
Sarah, there may be some questions for you. Traditionally at City Council, we don't permit clapping, but with the concurrence of my committee members, I say for tonight we will allow clapping. Sarah, we may have some questions for you here from councillors. Councillor Perks.
Just very quickly, Sarah. So I'm presuming when you say your school was surrounded by farmers' fields, you were outside the GTA, or?
That's right. Well, yeah, I grew up outside of Hamilton.
Outside Hamilton.
Yeah.
So Ontario Place very much functioned as a regional serviced for the kinds of things you described.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Cynthia Wilkie from Ontario Place for All, and after that, we have Sherry DeNovo and then Norman DiPasquale. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here. You can start any time you'd like.
Right. Well, thank you for having us, for inviting us in. I'd like to thank the Community Council for convening this subcommittee and the subcommittee for their leadership, and particularly yours, Councillor Cressy, for, I think, getting the ball rolling on this issue. So I am here, oh, and thank you for everyone being here, not just on a nasty Tuesday evening, but it's Mardi Gras. We could be out doing something else, eating pancakes or whatever. But, okay, so I'm here speaking on behalf of Ontario Place for All, and you should have a letter from us in front of you, and unfortunately, sadly for you, I'm going to repeat what is in that letter for the benefit of everyone who's sitting here. So Ontario Place for All is a grassroots organization that came into being in mid-January as a result of a rally sponsored by Park People and Waterfront for All. More than 1,600 people who are passionate about Ontario Place have now joined and endorsed the core principles for the future of Ontario Place coming out of that rally. And anyone in this room can do that too by going to OntarioPlaceForAll.com and signing up. So please do that. We are appearing here tonight to urge the committee to adopt those core principles that have been developed by the people who have participated in Ontario Place for All. And here they are. First of all, Ontario Place must be for all and kept publicly accessible. Before any changes, there must be a thoughtful, comprehensive public review with a full and robust public consultation, something like what we're doing here, but carried on by the province in partnership with the city and the community. Before any, public interest. This is one of the key, I think, key emblematic ideas. Public interest, not commercial interest, must drive the new vision. No casino, no casino, no casino. Absolutely no casino. But no casino is not good enough. We want more than just no casino. At a high level, future plans must acknowledge the waterfront's Indigenous heritage. And I'm very happy to see the councillor from the Mississaugas of the Credit here. Very welcome here. Already, Ontario Place we have a responsibility to engage in reconciliation, and there are many steps we could be taking, and Ontario Place provides an opportunity to take a further step. There's already a small but symbolic but very important gesture in Ontario Place, which are the moccasin markers and the tree markers as part of the William Davis Trail. And they were established in cooperation with a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Carolyn King. We need to do more. We also believe that Ontario Place must be maintained as part of Toronto's waterfront park system. It is a huge piece of the waterfront, and we don't have enough waterfront. We have a huge city behind a tiny piece of waterfront. And as we can see in the central waterfront, that little piece is stressed. We need to have a lot of waterfront. People are nourished by water. People get into the water. And this is a place where actually people can get into the water if we designed it properly. We also agree with the presentation that we just heard that the future of Ontario Place has to be integrated with the future of Exhibition Place. The two parts of Toronto really need to work together to be knitted back into the community, to be connected to the communities around, and to connect those communities to the waterfront. They should celebrate celebrating Ontario is also, we completely agree with Sarah, who spoke so eloquently, that this should be part of the plan for Ontario Place. And finally, absolutely, the Cinesphere, the pods, and Trillium Park, where it is, have to be preserved. So this is at a high level. Our members have all kinds of ideas, and the people who participated in the forum have all kinds of interesting ideas about what could happen in Ontario Place. Swim, Drink, Fish would like to establish a swimming pier where people can jump into the water at Ontario Place, which happens to have the best water quality along the waterfront.
And we're just coming up after 5 minutes. I'm going to let you wrap up just to
I
give
am
you a heads up.
actually just about finished. So there are many ideas, and Ontario Place is actually a big place. There's 69 acres. There's room for a lot of different things, a lot of diversity. So, and we've heard from the presentation that Ontario Place is not broken. It is already a vibrant part of Toronto's waterfront park system. Last year it had 1.4 million visitors, and that doesn't count the people who went to the Budweiser stage. It's already partway through a renewal that gave us Trillium Park, the William G. Davis Trail, and a refurbished Cinesphere. We need to continue that, and we should be building on all of that to ensure that Ontario Place meets the needs of Toronto's growing population and is capable of offering visitors to Toronto an unparalleled experience of the lake. So we're looking forward to working with you. We're counting on you as a strong ally for us in saving Ontario Place. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much, Cynthia. Our next speaker is Sherry DeNovo. Is Sherry here?
I do not see the Reverend.
Coming up after the Reverend DeNovo is the chair of No Jets TO, Norman DiPasquale, who is also the local Toronto Catholic District School Board trustee for this area. And while Norman is coming up, can I take a moment to recognize an elected official in the audience? MPP Chris Glover for Spadina Fort York has joined us here as well. Thank you, Chris. Norman, you have 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I've come here wearing two hats. One is the chair of No Jets TO, and secondly as the Catholic School Board trustee of the area representing Ontario Place. So as chair of No Jets TO, we didn't battle against impossible odds for the future of our waterfront just to have Premier Ford take it away from us. We didn't fight for a balanced waterfront for Ford to put his finger on the scale. We didn't get, between all of the different waterfront fights, we didn't get 60,000 petitions signed just to have Doug Ford take this away from us. We didn't save Ontario Place from the threat of jets just so Ford could threaten us with a casino or tearing down the Cinesphere, the pods at Trillium Park. We have to establish a framework for Ontario Place that's open and accessible for all to enjoy, that respects the heritage and does what Ontario Place was always meant to do, look to the future and bring all of Ontario along for the ride. The previous government's plan for Ontario Place is actually a good starting point for a vision for the site. Envisioned a system of connected parks, beaches, and playgrounds for Ontarians to enjoy. Phase 1 of their vision brought 1.5 million to Ontario Place, about the same number of people as the CN Tower. I ran a Jane's Walk there last year and had to take people through Trillium Park and then back the other way through Trillium Park, and then another group back completely through Trillium Park again. There is so much interest in what's been built there. If you haven't gone to see Trillium Park, please go there and you can be inspired for what a landscape architect can create for our city. It is serenity, peaceful, and a wonderful place to visit and enjoy. Looking back, the children's playground on Ontario Place was a smashing success because it was free and full of imaginative play spaces for kids. Failure came to Ontario Place when it was wrongly viewed as a profit center. It's Ontario Place, it's a place to stand, a place to grow, and I think you all know the rest. As a Catholic School Board trustee, I'd also like to quote the Archdiocese of Toronto's Cardinal Collins stance on Ontario Place. I'm particularly concerned that marriages and families will be hurt or even destroyed through greater ease of access to gambling through the construction of yet another large casino. We seek to heal and are concerned by the expansion of the capacity to harm. In closing, I also wanted to point out the TRCA, they're piloting an outdoor learning environment study. What a great place to bring our students Ontario Place would be. I mean, you know, there's so much there to explore and see, and what a wonderful place to learn about the outdoors. You can go to Trillium Park and basically become a horticulturalist. So please, everybody, consider joining OntarioPlaceForAll.com. Let's make sure the voice of Ontarians cannot be ignored at Queen's Park. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norman. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Norman. Next up, we have Brenda Butler, and so that others can become aware, we have Rick Amos following Brenda, and then Edward Nixon. Is Brenda here? Brenda Butler. I'll try one last time. Is Brenda here? Nobody pretending to be Brenda, jumping up first. All right. Next up, we have Rick Amos from the West Side Community Council, who I see is here, followed by Edward Nixon and Dane Gragas coming after that. Rick, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
I don't know if this is on, but I'll...
Yeah, if you put it just as you were doing there, facing you, faced up, that's it. You got it.
Okay. My name is Rick Amos. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the West Side Community Council, which represents 12 community organizations in the West End of Toronto, including Liberty Village Residents Association, the Parkdale Residents Association, and many others around Ontario Place. Westside Community Council is a participating member of Waterfront for All and Ontario Place for All, and we endorse the contents of the deputations being made today by representatives of those organizations. We also endorse the deputation by the Ossington Community Association. We are deeply concerned about the recent actions taking place by the provincial government as regards to Ontario Place. We are especially concerned, first, that these actions were taken without any public consultation, and second, that the call for proposals will allow the destruction of both Ontario Place's world-renowned architectural heritage structures and the recent creative jewels, the Bill Davis Trail and Trillium Park. We call on the subcommittee to do everything in its power to prevent this destruction of these heritage buildings and parkland features, and to ensure that any future envisioning of Ontario Place is informed by extensive consultation with its owners, namely the residents of Ontario. In the remainder of my remarks, we would like to call attention to the connection of Ontario Place with Exhibition Place, comprising 300+ acres of publicly owned land. 2 points are significant. First, the future of Ontario Place should be linked to the future of Exhibition Place. These publicly owned lands should be properly integrated, as Ken Greenberg and many others have long endorsed, with an eye to maximizing parkland and green space, especially needed by the tens of thousands of new residents in Liberty Village and the surrounding areas, to creating a crown jewel on par with such great urban waterfront parks as Stanley Park in Vancouver and Millennium Park in Chicago. Second, Exhibition Place, like Ontario Place, is under threat of effective privatization. Unlike Ontario Place, however, Exhibition Place is city-owned and therefore is under your jurisdiction. We call on the members of the subcommittee, the mayor, Toronto City Council to extend their concern with Ontario Place to Exhibition Place. More specifically, we call on the city to take action addressing the following privatization encouraging initiatives. 1, in 2010, the city changed its relationship framework with Exhibition Place Board of Governors from one requiring the board to take revenue into account to one requiring the board to, quote, maximize revenue from all sources. This new imperative has removed any incentive to develop and foster the lands as park and community spaces, and has served as an excuse for the board to appropriate public lands and redistribute them to private hands in the form of long-term leases, as with the 12 acres handed over to Hotel X for 99-year lease. We call on the city to revise the relationship framework agreement with Exhibition Place Board to remove the requirement that the board maximize revenue from all sources. 2, in 2006, most of Exhibition Place was converted from park and open space land use designation to regeneration land use designation. allowing leases longer than 21 years. By the city's own definition of disposal, such dispose of those public lands into private hands. The Board of Governors has now introduced an official planned amendment that would allow leases of longer than 21 years in the remaining park and open space. We call on the city to reject this requested official plan amendment and to revisit the previous conversion of parklands to regeneration lands with renewed public consultation to reflect the unanticipated outcomes of the waterfront planning exercise started 15 years ago. Currently, local community associations are unrepresented on the Exhibition Place Board of Governors. We call on the city to require that the board include 2 representatives of local community associations. In conclusion, both Ontario Place and Exhibition Place are under serious threat of effective privatization. We endorse any and all efforts to keep public lands in public hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. Questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Next up, we have Edward Nixon. If Edward is here. Following Edward, I'll have Dane Gragas, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name there. I don't see Edward. I'll call him one more time. Is Edward Nixon here? Seeing that he's not, I have a Dane Gragas. Is Dane here? I'll call Dane one last time. Dane Gragas. Following, next up, I have a Bowden Redco. Is Bowden here?
Sorry, I was in the other.
Oh, come on, farm. Hey, Dane.
Talk about an entrance, eh?
That's a great entrance. Yeah, and they can, and they.
They did really good pronouncing the name.
Oh.
Just roll the R, a little Scottish.
All right. So we have Dane up, and following Dane for those in the room and also in the overflow room, we have Bowden Redco and then Benj Healy. Dane, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Councillor. I just want to take a moment for everybody to remember the Haida. The Haida was a World War II destroyer that was at Ontario Place for years and years. And it was part of the tribal class, which was kind of, I think, the first time the Canadian government ever sort of honored Aboriginal people by naming their warships after them. Our motto is a city within a park. So I think what we need to do there is actually create a village within a park that we have. Ontario Place has always had a role as a place of education and entertainment. That tradition needs to be carried forward and helped along because we don't really have a school to demonstrate those kind of skills that are in the community. I was in LA, they have special schools for entertainment, for music, for all these things. This speaks dearly to me because my daughter left this city because she couldn't find the kind of school that she wanted to go to here. So now she lives in New York. I think repurposing the buildings that we have there in some form to be places of education, schools, places of worship, places to live, all those things that make up a community. And I'm going to come back to that residential component because it's a very important component. A lot of the stuff that's come out on this has always precluded any residential from being built there. But when I look at those parking lots lining Lakeshore Boulevard and I see that we're in a housing crisis in this city, I say there's something that can be done there. Something that can be done to stitch those places back into the fabric of the city. And as we know, the fabric of the city always contains places for people to live. But down there between the Exhibition and Ontario Place, it's the largest chunk of the city where no one actually lives. So I think it's important that we embrace the concept of let's build something, and through that, we can somehow finance all these other wonderful things that we want to do because these buildings must be maintained. I think everybody realizes that we can't mess with that. That's like, we have so little heritage here that we really have to protect, vehemently what we do have. But we also have to recognize that there's economic realities, that some of this land has to be repurposed for other uses. And I would strongly recommend that we look at this residential thing and embrace it and say, you know what, we can put some buildings there. And one thing that came to me too about this was there's a lot of talk about building with wood now, building with wood, tall timber. And I think it's great because if you look at it from the Aboriginal point of view, that's what they used to do. They used to build out of wood, and they'd build by the lakeshore. And I think there's a nexus there that brings this all together that says this technology has come full circle. We can build out of wood. We can provide the housing we desperately need for people in this city. And we can, by doing that, we can assure that these structures and these parks are always maintained, because if we do have a community of people living down there, they will protect it. You'll never have to worry about a casino again because they'll say no, right? But that's why this is happening down there, because there's no one there that lives there to protect this land for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dane. Any questions? Thank you very much. Next up, we have Bowden Redco. If Bowden's around, who will be followed by Benj, Healy, and then Bill Greaves. Is Bowden here? All right. I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Redco.
Redco, okay.
The W in Ukrainian is the same as a V.
Gotcha. Mr. Redco, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm a bit repetitive, but I'm reading. Let me start by saying that it was not by accident that Ontario Place came to be built on the shores of the CNE. It was an extension of what the CNE was all about, showcasing Ontario, who we are and what we do. Ontario Place was designed to mimic Expo 67. The pods exhibited Ontario's cutting-edge technologies, while the Cinesphere featured north of Superior using IMAX to open the world's eyes to Ontario. It may have been a marketing ploy to court business and tourism, but it was also a family park and playground on a grand scale. Let me suggest that this family-friendly aspect was key to what once made Ontario Place so successful. I propose we make it a family-oriented music theme park, something that the West Island of Ontario is suited to. Ontario's government in the 70s wanted a place for people to celebrate their province. One way was through music and the performing arts at the Forum and venues scattered throughout Ontario Place. Music was integral to the enjoyment of the park, and there's no reason why it can't be a key or have a key role in its future. In fact, by focusing on music from a multicultural perspective, we can make Ontario Place even better than it once was. But it wasn't just an entertainment venue, it was also a place of dreams. They even wrote a song for its opening. I remember singing, "A Place to Dream, Ontario, airy, airy, aereo." Yeah, anyways.
Beautifully done.
Thank you. Yeah, dreams were a part of Ontario Place, and they should be part of its future. How? Partly by structuring a music and performing arts incubation program to be a part of its ongoing raison d'etre. It could even connect to the world by webcam. In some ways, Ontario Place is similar to the theme parks of Walt Disney. The difference is that Ontario Place was designed as a dreamscape for adults, and the pods are a perfect example of that. The attractions and entertainment at Disney parks are for kids. The displays and entertainment at Ontario Place were kind of designed for grown-ups. But the commonality is worth noting because it's the family-friendly nature of Disney parks that keeps them going. I believe the loss of family friendliness has contributed to the decline of Ontario Place. Things have come back, but that's, I think, generally true as a statement. With this in mind, we shouldn't view Ontario Place simply as an open-air entertainment venue. It should have a greater vision that involves everyone as we explore and develop existing and new music and performing arts forms. This could and should involve students and professionals from grade schools, colleges, and music institutions, which we have plenty of. Those exciting sights and sounds and family-friendly feelings of the past, and I'm sure a lot of you remember them, they can be revived, similar in some ways to what it was like when the Forum brought in musical acts that were, well, the whole family could enjoy. It's true that Toronto has many music venues and parks, but how many places do we have where the two of these come together meaningfully? There used to be a time when Toronto's parks featured band shows where neighbors could listen to live music. Those days are gone, but cities such as Chicago have since recognized the amazing richness that a large open venue can contribute to the urban fabric of a metropolis, and somebody's already mentioned Millennium Park. Most Torontonians who include Ontario Place as a summertime destination would cite the Forum as one of the reasons that they went. There was something about an open-air concert and its friendly environment that brought out the best in all of us. There are many reasons Ontario Place is not what it used to be, but I would suggest it could be that and even more if we were to make it a year-round destination as a family-oriented music theme park. It could have enhanced indoor and outdoor music venues, an interactive music playground, cutting-edge music technology displays, a music museum. There are all kinds of artifacts, musical artifacts, I don't know if anybody is aware, that used to be displayed at the ROM, but the curator apparently passed away, and so they're in storage. You know, Ontario Place, perfect. And you could also have workshop facilities. School kids, youth, and other performing artists could together create music and put on performances that reflect the new multicultural nature of our city and province. I was hoping to show you some drawings, but all I can say now is that, because I'm old school, so I couldn't put the drawings up somewhere. In any event, they would show you a new building that would unite the iconic pods and Cinesphere and provide sufficient space to make a year-round destination. The reason being that even as a child, when I went to Ontario Place, I sometimes would get rather hot during summer days. And one of the drawbacks was, and I spoke with Eb Zeidler, and he's all for the music theme park, but one of the things was that
I'm just going to ask you to wrap up shortly. We're just over 5 minutes.
This is the last thought. I would suggest that we do something there to make it even friendlier during the summer, something that unites the pods and the Cinesphere, and a structure that makes it usable during the entire year. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bowden. I don't believe we have questions. I checked.
You should.
Okay. Oh, we have questions of everybody, believe me. We'd be here till 4, though. Next up, we have Benj. There's Benj. And following Benj, we have Bill Greaves and then Mark Campbell. Benj, come on up. Officially on behalf of the Ossington Community Association?
I think so. Let's say I am, yes.
Okay. Take a seat, Benj.
Decision-making.
The executive board, right?
Anytime you're ready.
Thanks. I'm Benjamin Healy, known as Benj. I live at 44 Argyle Street in Toronto, and I'm the corresponding secretary of the Ossington Community Association. I want to call attention to a legal strategy of potential relevance to the future of Ontario Place. I'm not a lawyer, and time is short, so my aim is merely to get the idea in the air. The strategy appeals to the so-called public trust doctrine. In outline, this says that sometimes when a government owns lands or natural resources, the form of ownership does not confer absolute right of disposal. Instead, the government should be understood as trustee of the asset in which each member of the public holds a fractional beneficial interest. This interpretation empowers the judiciary to intervene on behalf of the public beneficiaries by enjoining governmental action which devalues or otherwise alienates the beneficial worth of the asset. The importance of the public trust doctrine is illustrated by an ongoing case in Chicago. There, the issue concerns Jackson Park on the south side lakefront, developed on landfill in 1893. The park's owner, the Chicago Park District, transferred ownership to the city. The city, in turn, conferred a 99-year lease for $1 to the Obama Foundation, which, last, intends to pursue a sweeping development of the park. A coalition of members of the public filed suit in U.S. District Court to enjoin these transfers. Just this February 19th, Judge Robert Blakey conferred standing, in other words, the capacity to sue, on the plaintiffs, permitting the advance of the lawsuit to trial. Essentially because, quoting, defendants have placed Jackson Park, land held in the public trust, in imminent danger of alteration, thereby depriving plaintiffs of their rights under the public trust doctrine without procedural due process. Judge Blakey concludes that plaintiffs, as Illinois taxpayers and beneficiaries of the public trust, have established standing under the public trust doctrine. Despite the striking parallels of the facts here with certain possibilities for Ontario Place, the legal situation is, of course, quite different. Jackson Park is in the United States. while Ontario Place is in Canada, and many commentators on the public trust doctrine have noted the greater development of the public trust doctrine in American jurisprudence relative to Canadian. Still, at least three important facets of Canadian public trust jurisprudence may be relevant. The first is the Federal Navigable Waters Protection Act, which many commentators see as placing Canadian waters, subwater lands, and foreshores into the public trust. It is evident that Ontario Place is built on fill over the subwater lands of Lake Ontario. Perhaps a perpetual public trust in those subwater lands can be asserted, which would then rise to the lands of Ontario Place itself. Or perhaps Ontario Place or parts thereof can be construed as foreshores or as placed into public trust by virtue of its obstructing public access to waters in the public trust. Second is the Canadian Supreme Court's 1991 uptake of a streets and parks component of American public trust theory. Quoting at some length, "The very nature of the relationship between citizens and government provides that government will own places for the citizens' benefit and use, unlike a private owner who benefits personally from the places he owns. The quasi-fiduciary nature of the government's right of ownership was indeed clearly set out by the U.S. Supreme Court, quoting, wherever the title of streets and parks may rest, they have immemorially been held in trust for the use of the public." Back to me. The founding documents of Ontario Place can perhaps be interpreted to establish it as a park, but at the very least, the previous government's establishment of Trillium Park is highly explicit in this intention, both in the name given to it and in the many consultation documents archived on the internet. Third is the possibility that Ontario Place, specifically and not simply by falling under a general principle, was explicitly or implicitly put into public trust. A 1970 ribbon-cutting speech by Premier John Robarts uses the quasi-fiduciary sounding language of gifting, quoting, Ontario Place is to be a showcase for our province and people, something akin to a spiritual home, a place to reaffirm our identity as Ontarians and Canadians, and a place which reflects us the way we are. Less lofty, if more explicit evidence, may also exist in documents, some of them confidential, from the city's eventual protracted property tax disputes with Ontario Place Corporation. So one thing that I have been able to find, a 2009 city staff report transmits Ontario Place's corporation's contention that Ontario Place will remain as public recreational land in the future, arguably an explicit acknowledgement that the land had already been placed in the public trust. Again, I'm not a lawyer, and my factual investigation here has been cursory, but perhaps these sketchy ideas may be fruitfully pursued by others with superior legal and research capacities.
It's the loudest cheer yet, Benj. Pretty superior.
Please.
Questions, Councillor Perks or Fletcher? Okay, thank you, Benj.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks to the committee.
Next up, we have Bill Greaves, to be followed by Mark Campbell and then Gil Peñalosa. Bill, come on up. Take your time and when you're ready.
Well, first of all, thanks for having this subcommittee and giving me a chance to speak. Okay, good. I will. Ontario Place, and I mean this in a very specific way, is beautiful. And I'm borrowing a definition here from Alain de Botton. To describe a building as beautiful suggests more than a mere aesthetic fondness. It implies an attraction to the particular way of life this structure is promoting through its roof, door handles, window frames, staircases, and furnishings. A feeling of beauty is a sign that we have come upon a material articulation of certain of our ideas of a good life. This past summer, I watched my sister swim beneath the pods in her first triathlon. They looped around the pylons, and I spectated from the futuristic bridges looking down, rubbing shoulders with strangers. I felt like I was living a good life at that moment as part of a city and a province. I also think it's a sign of great architecture when it has the humility to simply provide us with spaces where we can decide what we want to do. I don't think Ebb Seidler and Michael Huff said, you're going to have a triathlon here. What they did was provide a spectacular setting with calm water where we could come up with creative uses. I think nostalgia gets a bad rap. I think it's useful to note when a building has been inspiring over a lifetime. And I want a built environment that reminds me of that. On that same bridge when I was 9 years old, and I was there because my parents had made an executive decision to reschedule my birthday from February to June so it could be held at Ontario Place. I'm over it. I was walking across that bridge and, you know, I said, like, if we can build something like this, the future is going to be great. Imagine this. No, I'm not even going to do it. I was going to describe what it'd be like to be in a casino instead. So my personal experiences aside, there is ample evidence that Ontario Place is an extremely important piece of 20th century architecture. It is part of the movement, Neo-Futurism, which produced very few actual buildings. Cedric Price, Buckminster Fuller, Archigram. I joke to my architect friends that it's like Archigram actually built something. They mostly just did drawings. So also, it has received a few awards, and I'm going to read these super quick. The Royal Architectural Institute of Canada and the Natural Trust awarded it the Prix du XXe siècle for the Cinesphere and the Pods. Docomomo, an international organization that documents modern architecture, listed in 2014. The Ontario Association of Architects gave it the Landmark Designation Award. The Ontario Association of Architects Design Excellence Award. American Society of Interior Designers, an International Design Award. American Society of Landscape Architects Merit Award. American Institute, Iron and Steel Institute, Design in Steel, Citation, blah, blah, blah. And the Canadian Architect Yearbook Award of Excellence, projects in the design stage before it was even built. It was getting awards. Because of this importance, that's why, with the support of Ontario Place for All and the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, I've nominated Ontario Place to be put on the World Monuments Fund 2020 watch list of the 25 most important endangered cultural heritage sites in the world. It's where it belongs. It's a great candidate. And if everybody would like to talk to me and write a letter of recommendation for getting on that list, please come and find me. The more the better. I was going to quote Jim Janu and say something. You know what? Forget it. I'm going to put that in the same category as my casino comment. I just want to note that the fact that strangers are coming together right now to advocate for Ontario Place and to demand transparency in our government is another example of how powerful great public buildings connect us and inspire us to lead a good life.
Thank you very much. Questions for Bill? Seeing none. Thank you, Bill. Next up, we have Mark Campbell. And following Mark, I have Gil Peñalosa. Is Mark Campbell here? Yes, I see him coming up.
Good evening.
Welcome, Mark. Anytime you're ready.
Thank you so much for convening this. I think this is a very important thing to do. Mark Campbell, I grew up in Port Credit. I watched as Ontario Place was built in my high school years and attended a couple of years of high school going to Ontario Place, and I think it was influential in my deciding to become an architect, which I did. I've come back to Toronto, been living in Gord Perks ward for close to 4 decades now, and I had the good fortune to find out that I could actually ride my bike into Ontario Place back in the fall. And I was struck by its beauty and reminiscences that I'd had. I will read the article that I wrote and shared with Gordon and a few other people, if you don't mind. It's entitled Wading In to Float an Idea, What to Do with Ontario Place. Ontario Place sits derelict, a rusty, tired reminder of the giddy optimism of Ontario's capital post-centenary 1967. Casino, affordable housing, parkland, luxury condos, sold or leased out piecemeal, public or private, social or corporate. Yes to all of these things, year-round. How? Ontario Place must become a neighborhood, 24/7, 365. Earth, sky, and water. Toronto has been blessed with an abundance of each. Earth, though, has become exorbitantly expensive. Much of the cost of Toronto housing is attributable to the price of land. So we soar into the sky for views and dig into the earth for parking, higher and deeper. But what if land, a large portion of the development costs, were taken out of the equation? At Ontario Place, this is possible. Toronto's most successful neighborhoods are vibrant with pedestrians year-round, living, working, learning, shopping, playing. Ontario Place could too, by inhabiting its watery edges with a variety of homes, private, rentable, affordable, luxurious, and everything in between. Not limited by land, but on the water with floating homes, boats. There are currently dozens of boat slips that for most of the year sit vacant. Why not moor houseboats there? With people living there year-round, opportunities for shops, restaurants, workplaces, and personal services would emerge. Houseboats come in a variety of sizes, costs, and finish levels, catering to different income levels. Buying one is significantly cheaper than a condo, and you can take it with you or sell it. Naturally, there would still need to be a need for infrastructure, water, power, garbage removal, sanitation services. Communities of houseboats exist elsewhere in Europe, Vancouver, even Scarborough, so provision of these services to waterfront community is doable. Where would you buy one? There are a few used ones for sale, though hardly enough to create a critical mass for a successful neighborhood. There is, however, an enormous manufacturing and assembly facility with a skilled workforce that are now out of jobs near Lake Ontario in Oshawa. If the idea catches on here, houseboats could provide housing and re-energize waterfront communities elsewhere. Houseboats can also be rented out long or short term. Being much smaller than a single-family home, they might appeal to downsizers and snowbirds, freeing up more land-based homes. Houseboats are essentially single-family homes, and unless there are a lot of them occupying a great deal of shoreline space, will not provide the density for a truly livable neighborhood. Increased density might be achieved quickly by permitting multi-family dwellings to moor nearby. What about buying an old cruise ship that has served its purpose and might be repurposed? Suites might be configured in a variety of sizes and finishes. Some might be used as hotel rooms, affordable housing, market rentals, or sold as condominiums. Cruise boats, too, can be refurbished or moved, or when their time comes, moved again. An affordable cruise ship might find its home near affordable apartments. Maybe you put them on other stretches of the waterfront. A permanently moored cruise ship could also serve as a resource for houseboats, providing restaurants, taverns, ballrooms, event facilities, even the occasional casino night. The community would become an intriguing destination, encouraging more street life, or wharf life, if you like, visited by Torontonians and tourists alike. Located near the Billy Bishop Island Airport and not far from Union Station and downtown, local and distant travel becomes a breeze. Oh, I'm over my time. May I continue a bit?
I'll just ask you to wrap up in a sentence if
Okay.
you can, as we're just over 5 minutes.
The idea is that if we can have people living at Ontario Place, that it becomes a 24/7 neighborhood, and all of the good things that other people here will be describing can live even more.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mark? Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Gil Peñalosa, and to be followed, for those listening, by Dale Taylor and then Max Beck. Gil, you're on when you're ready.
Thank you. I think that we must clarify that we are here basically because City Council has not done almost anything with Ontario Place, as well as the Liberal government. So when nothing happens, we leave a huge vacuum that someone is going to fill it up. The Liberal government, after many years, including majorities, they did just very little, too late, like most things in the previous government. Also, I think that I'm really sorry to see that here we only have the city councilors that are quote-unquote left councilors, and we don't have any from the right councilors, because this is not a left wing or right wing. This is about city making. How are we going to create a great Toronto for everybody? And it would be nice if we had the mayor or if we had some of his best friends. We need them sitting here. Also, we need more MPPs sitting here. It would be nice also even to have councillors from other surrounding municipalities, because Ontario Place goes beyond that. I want to ask City Council also to be much more proactive, not reactive. If Doug Ford had not come out with this proposal, probably we would not even be having this meeting. Nothing would be happening in the next few years. Downsview Park. Downsview Park is almost twice Central Park in New York. There was a fantastic master plan done 20 years ago, and not only nothing has happened, but what has happened is horrible, done by the federal government. And I have not seen any action from the city council. Now it's being run by the real estate company of the federal government, by Canada Lands, and they're doing horrors. And at least we should be putting pressure on the federal government to transfer from the Canada Lands to Canada Parks, to Parks Canada. Now that Parks Canada is managing the Rouge Park, they could be also doing Rouge Park and Downsview together, but they're giving it away to TFC and to others. So I think that we need to anticipate. It's not just about plans. We saw Transit City, fantastic plan, but nothing was done. So when our new government came on board and first they said Transit City is dead, it was dead. Same thing might be happening with Ontario Place. So I ask you in Downsview Park, in Ontario Place, in many others, to let's be proactive, because being reactive, it becomes very hard. I also think we need to be bold. I hear so many good stories about Ontario Place. As immigrant, I've been in Toronto 20 years. I went to Ontario Place almost as soon as I arrived. I think Ontario Place was a nice place 50 years ago when it was built, and maybe for the first 20 or 30 years. But let's be honest, it's not a world-class facility by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not only the founder and chair of 880 Cities, but I'm also past chair of World Urban Parks. I have worked in parks in more than 350 different cities all over the world, in every continent. And when we see what has been happening in waterfronts in Oslo or in Copenhagen, even in our waterfront, who would have thought that Queen's Quay, 4 lanes of cars, totally asphyxiated by cars, we were gonna take away 2 lanes and create a gigantic promenade of walking and cycling. That's fantastic, and we did it. I mean, if you had told anybody about this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they would have thought you were crazy. Well, we did it. So Waterfront Toronto has done so many good things. Actually, they should be right here on the table. So I think that although it had a very good past, I think we need to focus in Ontario Place in the future, not in the past. We are going to increase the population of the extended GTA by more than 50% in the next 25 years. There's a huge sense of urgency when we're going to grow by more than 50% the population. So what kind of Toronto are we going to have? We can really have a world class. For example, not a Tinky Bridge connecting Ontario Place to Exhibition, but maybe 200-meter wide green area over the highway, making a nice connection. Even Dallas, they just did a gigantic park connecting parks on both sides of a highway on 200 meters wide. So I do think that we can do it. I think we should be optimistic. I think we should look at the opportunity. I think we should do like a rural alliance. It's like a three-legged stool. One of the legs are elected officials at the city, at the provincial, even at the federal. Another leg is the city staff, but not only the planners. Let's invite public health and economic development and the environment. And the third leg is the community. All of these activists, the universities, the business community, the citizens, and together with the sense of urgency, which might be the population growth, or might be that forcing us into this, then we can develop a shared vision of Ontario Place, and then we need to act. And with vision and action, I think we can create a fantastic Ontario Place that will be good for every citizen in Toronto and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to clarify that this is Toronto and East York Community Council, a subcommittee. So that's why we're here. We're the waterfront councillors, and we can't have councillors from any other part of the city on our community council panel. So just to clarify, you thought, why are we here? That's why we're here, and I think everybody should know that.
No, I just think that it would be nice.
I'm just letting you know.
Okay,
That's all.
even just attending as visitors. I know many councilors go to different committees, even when they're not members, but we need to realize that this is not a left or right.
You know, we all went on the Doug Ford diet, and there's only 25 of us, so, and it means that we don't have a lot of time. So we're here tonight because we want to hear from you and take this to our community council. So that's the way the city works. I just wanted to tell you that, that's all.
But also, let's clarify, Ontario Place is not a downtown issue. It's a
No, I
citywide
totally
issue.
understand that, but this is what we're doing. You all are going to do many things out there, and you can talk to any other councillors you'd like. This is how we're taking some action from our community council. And just to be clear on the structure here at the city. That's all. Just to fill you in. That's all. Thanks for coming. It was great to hear you.
Thank you. And please, nobody cheer for the Doug Ford diet. Just.
Well, we're not cheering for it, but we certainly went on it rather drastically.
Next up, I have Dale Taylor, to be followed by Max Beck, and then Gadda Costa. Dale, please come on up. Yeah, you can have, if you have it facing you just like that on the screen. Thank you very much. That works. And Dale, anytime you're ready.
It's not legible. Good evening. My name is Dale Taylor. I'm a retired civil servant from the Ontario Government Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
It's your fault.
No. He's kidding.
And an active volunteer in Toronto. As someone who has championed the reuse of the Zeidler pods at Ontario Place as a World Water Center, I am very pleased to be addressing the subcommittee tonight. Ontario Place is all about water. I'll say that again. Ontario Place is all about water. For a few years, Drew Sinclair of SVN Architects and Planners and I have been working on a concept for the Toronto waterfront. Among the possibilities, we think our concept fits perfectly into any plan for Ontario Place that will save and reuse the pods and the Cinesphere. Our vision is to work with Indigenous partners and Toronto area's water agencies, businesses, activists, and innovators to repurpose the pods as an innovative world water center, meeting the need for a single hub in Toronto devoted to water. It would include a water museum, a secondary school level water school and camp, and a water research and development center. It will begin with an emphasis on the Great Lakes freshwater supply, something that we in the GTA and throughout Ontario have to be very vigorously protective of. We think a good name for the complex would be, if permission is received, the Mandamin, Ontario World Water Centre. That's after the late Ojibwe grandmother, Josephine Mandamin, who founded and led the Great Lakes Water Walk for many years, a tremendous initiative in raising water awareness. It's a very meaningful experience to go on that Great Lakes waterfront, as I have and my son Michael has. It will take time and many partnerships to realize our full concept for a World Water Center. It will not produce net revenue in the first years, but when our full concept is realized, it will repay its initial investment many times over for Toronto and for Ontario. Equally, it will respect the water-related purpose and renowned built heritage of Ontario Place. I have a third slide. Is that up, Mike? In any event, let me finish by just quickly commenting on status. We were invited to and did present our concept to Ontario Infrastructure in early 2018. But then a certain election intervened. We have not been invited since then by any Ontario agency. We are prepared to present our concept in some detail to anyone interested, including this subcommittee, at any time. A number of related developments, like a nonprofit incorporation, forming a board, and other aspects are basically on hold until we can find a site partner along the waterfront. And we're hoping that will be Ontario Place. In any event, we share the hope that whatever else happens at Ontario Place, it will save and include a major public reuse of the pods and the Cinesphere. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, next up we have Max Beck, followed by Max we have Gadda Costa, and then Monica Sapinska. Max, we all know you well. Welcome. Start anytime you'd like.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that Council has decided to have these hearings, because I think they'll be a very important part of what happens next. People have said much of this before, but Ontario Place was really started with a grand vision of hope for the future in Ontario and as a showcase to the best of the province, including many government departments who showcased their work there in the early years. It had outstanding architecture, innovative buildings, and some leading-edge entertainment facilities. Had the world's first IMAX theater and the award-winning Children's Village. In the early years, it was very heavily subsidized by the government. And oddly enough, when it was built really as a summer place only, which is part of the challenge, I think, of it. The government gradually lost interest in using it as a showcase and simply wanted to no longer spend money on it. The decline started about 20 years after its opening, and it's now close to 50 years old. I had the fortune of being the general manager of Ontario Place for about 10 years in the 90s, which was really the start of where they started, I think, not so interested in putting money into it anymore, and government departments that used to be in those towers on the West Island pretty well all pulled out at that point in time. But I have a couple suggestions for the revitalization, because it dearly needs revitalization. Ontario Place must be developed in coordination with Exhibition Place. No plans of redevelopment will be effective unless they're integrated, and the great exponential energies can come from joint redevelopment. The Cinesphere and the pods designed by Eberhard Seidler are iconic and must be preserved. The Cinesphere has been upgraded already. The pods are a bit more of a challenge, but they can be made into year-round facilities and keep their integrity as heritage architecture. Partnering with major urban development organizations is, or better still, a series of partners, is a solid approach as long as there's public input and full public transparency of the process. Above all, I think we need to think very big. It needs to be bold, and ideas need to be bold and broad for revitalizing the site. I had a lot of involvement with Granville Island when I lived in Vancouver, and it has a very broad range of activities from a public market, restaurants, a hotel, the Arts Club Theater, the Granville Island Brewery, and even a cement factory right in the middle of it. The mix is the magic there. It's only 35 acres, but on that 35 acres, the government invested the grand sum of $24 million, was all the public money that went into that, between the years of 73 and 82. And for almost 50 years, it has consistently generated revenue for the government. And today it's the home of 275 businesses and facilities that employ more than 2,500 people and generate more than $215 million of economic activity every year. When I was at Ontario Place, I did try to bring in some activities that would be more year-round, expand the season. Some of the efforts we worked on, but were not supported by government, were one, we had a tentative agreement with Ripley's Aquarium to build the aquarium on the waterfront, not under a tower. We worked with Chorus Entertainment, who did a tremendous amount of children's program, to try to develop a children's facility there. Talked to our Ontario Archives about possibly coming there. With Cirque du Soleil about having a permanent home in the province, as they have in some other places around the world. The Budweiser Amphitheater, formerly the Molson Amphitheater, was the only major new development built during the 90s. It was built entirely by Molson's from the private sector, and it continues to develop top quality concerts and a revenue stream for Ontario Place. If you're going to proceed with redevelopment of the site, I think Ontario Place Corporation and Board needs to have more independence. It's quite controlled by government. If it's to operate entrepreneurial and really move forward, it needs to be more flexible and have the ability to make its own decisions, borrow funds, finalize agreements with third parties, etc. Full waterfront access and a park-like setting has taken a very long time to develop. The early years, Ontario Place was really sort of an isolated fortress for most of the year. It was surrounded by a fence, gates, bridges, and a moat. Very hard to get there other than the summer months when it was open. And you used to have to pay a fee even to get in and walk on the waterfront in those days. So for the first 20 years of Ontario Place, you had to pay to get down, even to just have a stroll along the waterfront, or to dine in a restaurant there, or go to the Children's Village, which is really one of the best children's play opportunities in the world at that time, and still was, could be.
And Max,
anyway,
I'm just going to ask you to wrap up as we're over time.
Okay, I think the Ontario Place needs to stay open like that, and I think on 155 acres of land, we could do much, much more. And I think that I think it's imperative that the site remain free and try to be open year-round for the public. So thank you.
Thank you. And I see you. Councillor Fletcher has some questions.
Hi, Max. I just thought that was very interesting about there needs to be the closer relationship between X Place and Ontario Place. How would you think about that or proceed with that?
Well, actually, I mean, I think they could, if you did some good negotiations on it, probably could simply be operated as one corporation or one entity. I'm not sure. That has been discussed in the past. It's never been brought to fruition, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, frankly, you know, there was always a competitive element, and sometimes not necessarily even helpful to each other, and that has to stop. And I think it could be could be operated as a joint site and decide to, flip a coin, whatever, to decide about who owns it. But I think it's, it really should be a public corporation that is, maybe the city had some shares in and the province had shares in, and really develop. Otherwise, you'll never really make it work well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Perks? Oh, no, sorry, Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much, Max. This is actually really interesting because I think we're getting to new territory here. I took over on Exhibition Places board for Councillor Pantalone, and the first thing I said to him was, why are we in isolation talking about this site and not the other? And he sort of laughed and gave me the pat on the shoulder and said, hey, kid, good luck. Because every couple of years we give this a try. And as obscene as it is that the sites operate in isolation, there was an agreement by the previous government and our city to master plan both sites together. I don't know, do you have any history on, I'm getting to the question. Do you have any history on if a plan like that has ever been done to at least look and structurally look at the two sites as one, and then have the governance come out of that? Are you just aware if that's happened before? A lot of these old texts can be lost.
I don't think there was ever a really a full one, but I believe it's part of some, there were preliminary discussions on several occasions, and I believe that Joe Berridge's firm did some very broad conceptual ideas about how it might work together a bit more. I mean, one of the crucial things is transportation. I mean, a bad decision would put the transit right at the back of the X site, which puts it even further away from the waterfront. And at this time of year, I mean, getting down there on a day like today, forget it. I mean, you'd freeze. And, it's actually almost life-threatening to go down to some of that territory this time of year.
Yeah, I think this is going to be at the core of how the city goes forward. That's really great for you to come in today, Matt.
Great, thank you. One little thing I should add, by the way, is I think, and I'm not sure if it was on Lynn's thing, there's another water lot there too. I hope it was on that map, but Ontario Place owns another waterfront lot that makes the site another about 50 acres or 60 acres. So
don't remind them.
I think Councillor Fletcher had a follow-up question.
Okay.
Yes, I love acres. So you said it was 155 acres. Is that the whole site? Are you adding?
Well, that includes water.
That's part of the water. Any idea how much?
Land per se?
Yeah.
No, I think only about 70 acres, I think, of it land. Roughly half is water.
And then part of that is the city-owned parcel 4 that we saw.
Yes, and I'm not sure, I didn't do that much research on it. Historically, we've always talked about the 155 acres, but I think the city strip is a separate one.
70s land and the rest is all water.
That would be my rough guess, yes.
That's your rough guess. And when you're suggesting kind of a public corporation, X Places already has moved away from, as you may have heard somebody say, moved away from the city. And sometimes I think people are frustrated with the land use and development that's going on in X Place without any kind of larger input like we're getting here tonight. Would you not worry a little bit about that in putting them together right at the moment without some further governance discussions about the two sites?
Well, I think you can, as owners, you should still put some pretty strict rules on what happens, and maybe some on the processes too. But I think if you really, really want to move ahead and redevelop those sites, it's best to do it together, and it's best to do it in some more entrepreneurial format than I think even exists with the move that the X has already taken. But certainly Ontario Place was, the government has too much say over what happened. It has a board, a separate board, but it doesn't have that much independence, to be honest.
And was there ever the thoughts about winter programming? Because I know you ran that. How did you address winter programming?
Beg your pardon?
How did you address winter programming? Because
Well, it's tough down there because it can be a very brutal site. I remember, too, we spent a great amount of time once trying to get the water to freeze down there. We were flooding it like you did in the old days and and it beautiful and beautiful. And the word went out one night we could go skating. So staff, this was all behind the fences, staff all went skating one night. We got back the next morning and been a big windstorm overnight, and the water comes through those around the sunken boats and in the ends. Everything was all upheaval and stuff, and it didn't last, so it didn't work. But they have winter programming there now that's fairly effective. It could be tons more, but you can't get there by public transit at this point.
it's a problem. Yes, thank you for both of those main points.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Next up, we have Gadda Costa. And Gadda's to be followed by Monica Sapinska, followed by Lizelle Gelias. And when you're ready. Sure.
Testing, working. Thank you very much for having this kind of public consultation and discussion. I think it is very important to hear the voice of the inhabitants of the city. I was just wondering along the lines of having basically like an inspiring structure that joins Ontarians. A lot of the times it is easy for some of the cities to become a little bit kind of centered around their own interests, centered around their own kind of cultures, and it is hard to know, like, how much do we know of other Ontarians? How much do we know of people in Sudbury? How much do we know about people in Timmins? And for some of us who had had the chance to travel around the province and had these kind of conversations, it becomes obvious that we share lots of the same dreams. We share lots of the same inspirations and motivations as well. One of the things that came to my mind, and I was very surprised, was the fact of listening to our Premier Ford said that he might be thinking about learning French to speak to the people in Quebec. Mais nous savons aussi des personnes qui parlent français ici. We have Franco-Ontarians, and I think it is important to know that we have such a diversity. We have such an amazing population with different talents, with different professions, that sometimes it will be good just to look around to find people that are doing amazing things at the world level. As you have probably known from Dr. Donna Strickland, she won a Nobel Prize and for her work with lasers. There's like thousands of procedures happening in the Toronto General Hospital with world-known physicians. And they're not only saving lives, but they're actually breaking ground for some patients, saving lives in a way that nowhere else in the world has been done. So I think it will be amazing to have a space in Ontario, being Ontario Place, very adequate for this, where we can actually have a showcase of all these innovations that are happening in Toronto, in Ontario, in Timmins, in Ottawa, Sudbury, so on and so forth. And also like as a common place where Ontarians can have dialogues, can have conversations. With the technology that we have available now, we could have even like an actual portal, like an actual door with a camera, with the sound and everything that is needed to have a conversation on real time with somebody in Sudbury, in Timmins. So I think it will be great to have a location where we can all connect and we can learn more about each other, as well as basically become a community at a provincial level. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No? Thank you very much, Gad. Next, I have Monica Zapinska. Monica? And following Monica, we're going to have Lizelle Gelias and Daniel Rothstein. Hi. Thank you for coming out tonight. There's a clock up here to my right. You'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to listen to our perspectives today.
Nice and close to the microphone, please.
Rarely does a government have an opportunity to make a decision about such an important part of public heritage and our future. In light of the growing population of Toronto, especially in the downtown core, including Liberty Village, Harbourfront, and other areas in the vicinity of Ontario Place, it seems clear to me that our city desperately needs more public space which can show ingenuity and uniqueness of our city and our province. Let's try and plan for the health of our city. With the projected growth of downtown Toronto to nearly double in the next 20 years, we will need more green space and recreation space, space for the thousands of people who will be making Toronto their home. Building up on the structures that are already within Ontario Place, the performance stage, Parkland, Pods, Cinesphere, the Marina, I think would benefit the city and province to create public space for entertainment, relaxation, and rejuvenation. Dare to dream. Imagine creating an innovative world-class playground for children that encompass water activities, science, and the arts. Think of the Millennium Park in Chicago. Can you see the water fountains, the safe, free playgrounds that will become landmark of the hot Toronto summers? Let's create a beautiful swim center for all ages, including indoor and outdoor swimming pool, saunas, hot tubs, and the best recreation that can benefit citizens of this city and the province. An indoor-outdoor pool looking over the beautiful lake, open all year round, that will help Torontonians be physically and mentally healthy and enjoy our waterfront as well. You can make our city livable, lovable, and healthy. Let's not forget Canadian passion for food. Why not create an opportunity for various culinary schools to rotate and manage food stations, including restaurants at various price points, that would showcase Ontarians' talents, heritage, and the bounty of our province's agricultural sector. As an elected government and city councillors, you have in front of you an opportunity to leave a landmark for generations to come. So thank you for making the effort to fight for this. Our city is stressed with high growth and congestion. Already, our parks are full. For example, 1.5 million trips are made to the Toronto Island community each summer. High Park is full on the weekends, as is Sunnybrook Park, the beaches, and Trinity Bellwoods. I do not even want to mention the traffic on summer weekends as Torontonians try to escape from the city. We need another option to make the city a livable place in the summer. Today we have an opportunity to create a needed recreational place for us that can be a place to visit, to enjoy nature and sports, with a safe, beautiful playground for children. Dare to make this a healthier and a better city. I think that Ontario Place can easily be connected to the public transportation by bus. You can access either the street lines on King, Queen, or Bloor Street. In the future, it could be possible to imagine a ferry between Ontario Place and the west part of the city, either for commuting or for recreation. Don't forget how fast we are growing, doubling the downtown core population in the next 20 years. As humans, we need a healthy place for relaxation and recreation. We already have ample gambling opportunities. Ontario has 71 casinos in which you'll find more than 30,000 slots and gaming machines. There are a total of 760 table games. Having another one will just make it worse for the well-being and the mental health of Torontonians. We only have one Ontario Place that we can fight together to save. I wasn't born when it was created, and when I came as a child to Toronto, we couldn't really afford to go there, but it looked beautiful, and eventually we ended up going to Cinesphere, and that was very special. I really think that as a world-class city, a free area for kids to enjoy recreation would be an amazing opportunity for us.
Thank you very much, Monica. Any questions? Thank you for coming out tonight. Lozelle? Lozelle? Come on up. After Lozelle, we're going to have Daniel Rothstein and Leslie Thompson. Hi. Thanks for coming out tonight. You have 5 minutes.
Is it close enough? Is it okay? I feel like I'm in Toastmasters here. Okay, my name is Lizelle Samuel Gellius, and I'm here to advocate for Ontario Place to be turned into an Indigenous historical museum site. When I look around the city, I see pockets of neighborhoods that represent people. You got Spadina, we have Chinatown, the Greeks, the Danforth, Little India, Coxwell, and Girard. I look around you, Portugal, Italy, everything. Where's the Indigenous community? Nowhere. It's here, there, all over the city. Nobody wants to be traveling all over the city just to get certain things. Nowadays, people are getting too lazy to do that. They want it right there, one spot. Who better to give this land to than the people who own it? Who better would take care of this land? The Indigenous community. Each can have their own section. The Inuits can have the section where the Sinosphere is. Keep it as an igloo. Put a theater in there. Show movies. It can light up at night in a nice crystal blue. That'd look really nice instead of all these glass buildings. The Métis can have their section, tell about their story, and the Natives talk about theirs. Talk about waterways, canoe rides, back and forth. Teach people how to go in a canoe. I did when I was in Algonquin on Lake Opeongo, and I'm telling you, it was fun, but it was a mighty lake. You know, all these little things. Arts and crafts for kids, learning how to make native drums, doing drummings, medicine wheels, everything. I went to Kathleen Wynne. She was the MPP in my riding at the time. She was premier. She was on board. She loved the idea. She said she'll start the ball rolling, which she did. Because I have a friend, Mr. Larry Frost, who's the executive director at Nature, Native Canadian Cultural Center. He introduced me to a lot of people in the Indigenous culture. Yes, Doug Ford, I went to Doug Ford. He replied back in an email. He sent it off to the minister, Michael Thibault. I don't even pronounce his name wrong. And he got back to me as well. It's gotten so far, I even had an interview, not an interview, conversation with Chief Ava Hill, Six Nations. She said it's time for something like this to happen. So Kathleen Wynne did do what she promised, and it's gotten so far as to me getting a little deal with the government on the legal side of things. And I said, you know what, I'm going to just send it off to my friends in the Indigenous community and see what they think. I even reached out to MPP Glover about everything. A lot of people seem to be on board. A lot of people think that it is time for the Indigenous community to be recognized and appreciated. Indigenous youth, we know, have the highest suicide rate. They have no jobs. They could be the ones working there. To learn about their history, as well as having a job and feeling like they own something again that was taken away. We can do a lot of things that we can do with the Indigenous community there, and I think that'll be the best thing anybody can do. We want to talk about nature. They're the ones who respect it the most out of everybody. So I think this is something that a lot of people should really think about, and I think they're behind this, because this will make Ontario Place look marvelous. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? No? Thank you, Lizelle.
And I just want to say one quick thing, if I can.
Sure.
I think right now, I'm tired of hearing history. I want to hear about their history.
Very good.
Thank you.
Next, I have Daniel Rothstein. Following Daniel will be Leslie Thompson and Suzanne Cavanaugh. Daniel, hi.
Hello.
Thanks for coming out tonight.
My pleasure. Yeah, I just want to echo what I've heard tonight, that there's obvious physical heritage value here. But beyond that, something I love about Ontario Place is that it's always kind of been there for my lifetime. And I think it is all about public access, to echo that as well, and access to the landscape and access to the water. And, you know, there's some tension. People have talked about that we haven't done anything with Ontario Place over the years, but I think that's actually the value of this as a public asset, that we have this kind of fallow period to figure it out. We have this land that's not subject to market forces, and we can be thoughtful as we proceed. So I think that that's actually an opportunity. And I look toward Waterfront Toronto and the stewardship of the port lands as also in that framework, that let's not rush here, let's do this right, and let's do this slow. But the fallow period of time has given us a lot of new uses. And I want to mention In Future, the Arts Festival, which was a fantastic imagining of what this place could be. And I think what it did was it highlighted and used the ingenuity of the arts community to power something that was there. So it's a public asset. It doesn't have to be for profit, and the arts community would benefit greatly from being given an opportunity to program that space, as we saw within Future. Also, Trillium Park came from that fallow period, which is, if you go there on a summer day, it is full of people watching the planes take off, and it's a beautifully designed park that was made in partnership with Mississaugas of the Credit. So, and then we're at this critical moment where Gil Peñalosa was saying, let's speed it up. So that's what this follow-up period has brought us, this moment of action. So there's, you asked for ideas. I think there's so many ideas, but I think a main one I want to bring forward is the arts community, but also that if it's a park, that it should enable swimming opportunities. The western waterfront doesn't have a lot of places where people can swim, and the water quality there, according to some reports I heard at the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, said that the water quality there is higher, so even after a rain event, it's still clean to swim there, so something to think about. I also want to advocate for public sauna facilities at Ontario Place, and I do think I want to echo that opportunity for affordable housing, and that people need to be there to steward the land. So, and then as always, I think I want to ask the room, inspired by author and placemaker Jay Pitter, who's not in the room and whose perspectives are not here. Ages, cultures, and their perspectives, and how do we make sure that their voices are heard because they didn't make it here tonight. So, and I also finally just want to say to support the land claim of the Mississaugas of the Credit, because beyond the land acknowledgement, this is actually a relationship building, and that just radically changes what the city's relationship with the land we're on could be. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? No? Thank you very much. Leslie? Now, just for the benefit of people here, Leslie is with the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, and I see that they have a video for us, and it's going to run over your 5 minutes, isn't it?
It will, a little bit, just a little.
You guys all right with that?
It's worth it.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Won't even turn your clock on.
Okay. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak tonight. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Catherine Naismith, who is president of the Toronto branch of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. I'm chair of the board of the provincial organization. We are a province-wide, not-for-profit charitable organization, and since 1933, our members have saved and celebrated built heritage and cultural landscapes throughout the province. Today, we're focused on Ontario Place. ACO supports the preservation of forms of Ontario Places, supports the preservation of Ontario Place's heritage assets. Whatever forms the revitalization takes, there are qualities or values that Ontario Place has that make it a heritage site that deserves to be preserved. The obvious quality is good design. Eb Zeidler, the architect, and Michael Howe, the landscape architect, created a site that has been celebrated as a strong example of innovative design that pushed the limits of building technology at the time. It won all kinds of awards. We heard a list earlier, in Canada and abroad, and its comparable contemporaries include the Pompidou Center in Paris, Another important quality is its historic value. This site on the edge of Lake Ontario was important in both pre-colonial and colonial times. It is built on the traditional lands of the Mississauga.
Is this the video queued up here?
It is.
Okay.
I've
So
got
I'm going to ask you this, because we're indulging you with extra time, and in fairness to everyone else who's come out tonight, if you can just wrap up your verbal part?
I can do that.
Start the video? Okay, thank you.
So basically, conclusion is, Ontario Place has values. It has good design, it has historic value, it has cultural value. These are the values that make something a historic site. It deserves preservation, and we at our organization support it, and you're going to really enjoy this video. Okay, how do we start it? Press play, yeah. Sorry, I'm an Apple person. Where was that nice person? He's right there. Thank you.
We just have a round of applause for Mike.
Okay, there we go. The sound.
It stands at the western gateway to downtown Toronto. It's almost 50 years old, yet it still looks like nothing else in the city. This is Ontario Place. Ontario Place was built as a park for the people. And for many of us, it's got an immense amount of nostalgia. Today, the future of Ontario Place is uncertain. A key part of Toronto's waterfront, its value to the people of the province is enormous. But what's going to take form on this site is now in question. We could talk about the many architectural awards the space has won, the world-class concerts, the millions of visitors, the great food and spaces for children. But first, let's talk about where and what Ontario Place is. In the summer of 1968, the PC Premier of Ontario, John Robarts, announced the government's intention to build something new, exciting, and groundbreaking in Toronto to celebrate, as he put it, the mood of gaiety and openness of the province, something that would make our imagination soar. Starting in the 1920s, the Ontario Government Building at the CNE was the main source of Ontario celebration and promotion. But they wanted something new. Montreal's Expo 67 had just been a phenomenal international success. Ontario wanted a place of its own. The province chose the German-born architect, Eb Seidler, to man the helms. But where would it go?
Originally, Ontario Place was to be on the ground of the exhibition place. But however, we felt that if the project should present Ontario, it should be put into Lake Ontario.
The land where Ontario Place stands was simply part of Lake Ontario. The concept of building a large-scale project on top of the water was gutsy, complicated, and new. Here is the original hand-drawn sketch of the layout by Seidler in the late 1960s. Here is the first formal architectural plan for the space. Remarkably similar. To Seidler, the space was meant to be an accessible recreational space for all people, not just for exhibitions or profit. A park for the people of Toronto and beyond. The practicality of the project was complex. After a visit to the Caribbean by Seidler, he realized the usefulness of a large breakwater being used to the south of the space. The construction teams would intentionally sink 3 Great Lakes shipping boats, limiting substantial wind and water perforation upon the pods and cynosphere. Seemingly floating in the air, the 5 interconnected pavilions behind me were the architectural centerpiece of the entire project. The suspended pods were built with Ontario steel. Each 8,000 square foot structure was designed for flexibility of use and could be covered with either glass or steel. Modular ramps and bridges were built to connect the pods. The enormous pods were designed for easy reproduction, so the group of 5 could potentially grow in number. The other main building under construction was a 35-meter-wide triodetic dome called the Cinesphere. Surrounded by a moat, it would house the world's first permanent IMAX theater. Inside, the architects engineered a curved screen to maximize the impact of the revolutionary IMAX projector. A 24-track, 400-speaker audio system was installed.
People from all over the continent would go to the Cinesphere behind me. It was the very first IMAX theater in the entire world.
The Cinesphere, or the Bubble, or the golf ball as many would refer to it, would win international acclaim, and after a substantial refurbishment in 2010-2011, the space is back in fine form and as of 2017, back to showing blockbuster films to the public. The Forum was built as an outdoor venue designed for live performances. A hyperbolic roof would cover a revolving stage. Bench seating for 2,500 people was installed, and there was room for 8,000 on the grassy hills molded around it, as well as a fully functioning marina. The buildings and design of Ontario Place were only part of the puzzle. Landscape architect Michael Huff worked thoughtfully with Zeidler to truly consider the layout and atmosphere of the project. The landscaping of the space, to many, was equally as important. On May 22, 1971, Ontario Place opened, on time and under budget. 2.5 million visitors would come that year, all experiencing the Ontario-focused exhibits. The price of admission was $1 for adults and 50 cents for kids. In 1972, a young British-born designer, Eric McMillan, would be given the chance to design and create something that would be named the Children's Village. It was groundbreaking at the time and would lead to a lengthy and successful career for McMillan, with Time magazine at one point calling him the next Walt Disney. Children's Village was a huge success, as were many of the subsequent children's activities constructed on the space for the following 3 decades. The ball crawl, the net climb, the punch bag forest, birdie glide, foam swamp, cave crawl, legendary activities in their own right. The water parks would be incorporated in the late 1970s and would take on different incarnations through the years. Bumper boats, Ontario North Now's water slide mountain rides, kayaks. The space had everything to do with the lake, yet felt grounded.
The next performance in Cinesphere begins in approximately 10 minutes. May we suggest you proceed to Cinesphere now to ensure a good seat for this showing. With the lunch hour approaching, may we invite you to dine with us at Ontario Place. Our facilities include 18 fine restaurants offering a full variety in both menu and price.
For adults, there were bars and restaurants, and of course, the Forum. Bruce Cockburn, Burton Cummings, Johnny Cash, Blue Rodeo, B.B. King, Blondie, Tragically Hip, and hundreds of others. The Forum also regularly hosted the Toronto Symphony and other international orchestras. And for 3 years, a jazz festival ran there. On June 2, 1980, the Forum became the site of the Toronto punk rock riot. An overbooked Teenage Head concert at the Forum caused a riot and provoked a ban on hard rock music within the park for years. Thousands of fans of the Hamilton-based band hurled objects at the police, tried to swim onto the grounds, with dozens of arrests and charges laid, making that Teenage Head's second most famous Toronto riot, the first being at the Horseshoe Tavern a year and a half prior. In the winter of 94-95, the beloved Forum would be demolished and a brand new corporate-owned venue would be built. The Molson Amphitheater, now known as the Budweiser Stage, still stands there today with hundreds of thousands of visitors per year, as well as the new Echo Beach venue on the grounds. The rest of the old Ontario Place grounds haven't done quite as well through the years. In 2011, with attendance down, Ontario Place closed. Its status has been in limbo for many years now. Still, the Cinesphere and the Pods are one of the most recognizable buildings in the city, and they haven't been forgotten. In 2017, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada recognized the Cinesphere as a building of national significance. It now has heritage designation. In 2017, the face and energy of the Ontario Place grounds was substantially improved with the opening of the beautiful new Trillium Park. The brand new and now award-winning provincial park includes the William G. Davis Trail along the waterfront, 1,200 new trees planted, 28,000 new diverse shrubs, and with the help of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, a ravine with moccasin identifier at the entrance to the park.
That's the stencil that is at the Ontario Place entrance. It's an Anishinaabe stencil. We're Ojibwe, Mississauga is Ojibwe, and that you see the center seam. That center seam is described describes the people. Ojibwe means gathered up, puckered scene. Not everyone can do that, say that their footwear identifies them, but this one does.
I am currently standing in the brand new $30 million Trillium Park. It's got about 1.5 kilometers of trail along the water. It's got a beautiful view of downtown, a cool view of the airport. They have fire pits you can rent with your friends. And last year, over 1.2 million visitors came to a space that, until recently, was a parking lot. A lot of criticism of Ontario Place has revolved around it no longer being a family-oriented space. But with the new opening of Trillium Park in 2017 and over 1 million visitors last year, that claim has definitely been silenced.
Give us a place to stand and a place to grow, and call this land Ontario, a place to live for you and me, with homes as high as the tallest tree.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for
I saw that
indulging
with
us.
mixed feelings. I mean, it was delightful, but it also reminded me of the terrible fashion choices that parents imposed on children of my generation. So there you go. Thank you for your time.
Have that on our website very soon.
Okay. Let me just see. Suzanne Cavanaugh, followed by Ron Jenkins, followed by Arthur Klimowitz. Suzanne?
Well, good evening, and thank you.
Hi.
So yes, I'm Suzanne Cavanaugh, and I live just north of the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan. I live in a place called St. Lawrence, and the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association was one of the founding members of Waterfront for All. And Waterfront for All partnered with park people and with some of the councillors here and our MPP and our MP to get going on an organization called Waterfront for All, which my colleague Cindy Wilkie mentioned earlier with some of our guiding principles. This literally started around somebody's dining room table. I think it was Benj's or Bruce, I'm not sure, but it was a Sunday afternoon where we realized that we needed to do something when we started getting the wind from the provincial government as far as what was going to be happening. So thank you for your leadership for striking this committee, and we're going to be leaning on you and working with you to see how we can move forward with this. So we're asking you to help us, and we want to help you as well, to make sure that this isn't seen as a Toronto-centric issue. We have a current government climate where when they hear the word Toronto, it seems to be a trigger for them. So we are encouraging you to reach out to your colleagues through the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to make sure that this is going right across the province, but more in particular, the Greater Toronto Area. So part of our work, what we've done is we've reached out to the Premier, no response. We've reached out to Jim Janu, the new chair, no response. We've reached out to the minister in charge of this portfolio, no response. And we've reached out to Infrastructure Ontario, who is handling this process with expressions of interest, no response. So we've been trying to have some conversation with the government, so we're really leaning on you to help us. Part of the rhetoric that's coming out of the province is that telling some of the stakeholders who are interested in the expressions of interest, don't worry, we're just going to go ahead and do whatever we want. So our mantra is that, well, you have two choices. You can either work with the citizens of the province or not. So we would ask you that as you reach out to your networks for developers who may have indicated an expression of interest, that we would like to meet with them and to have the conversation to make sure that they understand what it is that we would like to see and what we don't want to see. We've been pretty clear tonight that we don't want certain things. There's been a lot of work done on some of the research in the past, so Ken Greenberg came over earlier to remind me that he was commissioned through his firm with David Crombie, who was representing the province, and Joe Pantalone, who was representing the city, and they were very close to working on a project together with Exhibition Grounds, and I think that was 2006 and 7. We think that, and so one of the things that I wanted to mention is that we did have this rally January 12th, so I think, again, it's another example of democracy in action, so this is great. I know that tonight we're talking to the choir, but I think there's still some messaging that we need to get out. At the Parks rally for Ontario Place, there was a journalism student who came over to me and said, so what do you think? Does Toronto really need any more parks? Are we kind of done? And I said, well, that could be a very subjective question. If you're asking me, I can say we can never have enough parks. But the easiest thing to do would be to go to Google Earth and take a look. And you will see that we are underrepresented with parks. In 1971, when this was opened, it was in a very remote area. And now when you take a look, this Ontario Place is surrounded by the equivalent of small towns. That would be Liberty Village, Fort York, and City Place. So now it's not only a district park for the people who live here, but it's still a park for all of the people in the province of Ontario. We still think that there's some opportunity here to take a look at the language, and we see this now as a waterfront city. And so we can start to tap into that and to continue to stitch. Some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the government now is we want to save the taxpayers' money. So we would encourage this provincial government to ensure that Trillium Park not be touched. It would be a shame if he took that $30 million park and threw it out the window. I have no idea how he sees that as saving taxpayers' money. Ken Greenberg also sits on the board for Waterfront for All and did talk about the economic impact. So as we're trying to reach out for the developers who are working on this expressions of interest, we need to use the language that the government is talking about as far as ROI and equity and accessibility. So we know from many of the studies, one in particular, HR and A, that there's a vitality with parks, increased taxes, jobs, and tourism. So my final comment is that the government can go ahead and scrub the website as far as the Heritage Cultural District. That's still there, it is a designation. And they can go ahead and rip up the plaque that talks about Ontario Place was built for the past, present, future Ontarians. But we're looking to you for your support and direction and how we can work with this government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? No? Suzanne, thank you. Next, I have Ron Jenkins, followed by Arthur Klimowitz and Donna Patterson. Ron, welcome. Oh, Mike? You can't leave the room, man. Ron, go ahead. You've got 5 minutes. That's good, yeah.
Here we go. Thank you for having us here today. What I want to talk about is how integral water is to Ontario Place and how integral Ontario Place is to the waterfront. Before Ontario Place, there was the C&E waterfront. And never mind that that waterfront was really just Lakeshore Boulevard and a concrete breakwater. People were excited to be near or on the water. And the waterfront had swimming races and sailboat and powerboat racing and high diving, the aquarama. I'm not recommending aqua, but these were big draws.
This is the highlight so far, though. Thank you.
Yeah, there are some great aquarama pictures, trust me. But also, it was just about people hanging out by the lake. I mean, you can look at the crowds in these pictures and see the draw that the water is. And we see that in the central waterfront now. Ontario Place is built on the strengths of that waterfront. And it was built by kind of threading its way into the lake. But if you look also at the most iconic pieces of the architecture at Ontario Place, you'll see what I mean. the Cinesphere is actually sitting partway in the water, and the pods are suspended above the water. The water is weaving all the way through Ontario Place. And the water, as you can see on the map, includes Brigantine Cove and the North Marina and numerous places. So I think we're already talking about the amount of water versus land at Ontario Place. It's about half water. And the water inside Ontario Place is separated by the hulls of 3 old lake freighters that were traveling 70 years on the lakes before they were sunk there to form the breakwater for the marina that's now and has been always a part of Ontario Place. The marina holds 240 boats and is always full or nearly full. It's more than 90% occupied on average. And from Etobicoke Creek to the Rouge River, the waterfront of Toronto is short on space to dock boats. So these boats do need Ontario Place. There are no berths being built for boats right now in Toronto. A lot of cities don't have a waterfront. They would die to have a lake like this at their doorstep. And if they suddenly found themselves with a lake, they would build a waterfront and they would develop it. We've already done some of that here in Toronto. And Ontario Place's Trillium Park is a magnificent addition to that waterfront legacy. But the province's expression of interest process defines parameters for Ontario Place redevelopment that entirely miss that Ontario Place is first and foremost about its place on the water. To take this 155 acres of waterfront park with water weaving through it and turn it into something that can be built anywhere else would be a disaster. And we'd be left with less than 5% of the parkland that is there now. Ontario Place is not the city's park, but it's a park for the people of the province. So it's ironic that it's the city standing up now to speak for all the people of the province. Please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Arthur Klimowitz, followed by Donna Patterson and Chanel Kendaya. Yeah, you can just sit in either of those seats. Just check that the red light on the button in front of you is on.
Is that all right?
Yeah, great.
Okay, I have a slightly unique perspective on this. I'm just going to read this out. I work for a bike shop in the east side of the city. During the summer, they open a bike rental on the Martin Goodman Trail in the East Beaches. Most of the customers are tourists from all parts of the world. As usual, people come back with a big smile and most typically a message. The message is how much they enjoyed riding the Toronto waterfront. For example, a woman riding with her boy told me she could hardly believe how beautiful our waterfront is. Now, most of the people don't come from just anywhere, but often from cities that are known for being great cycle-friendly places. The woman and her boy were from Montreal. I'm thinking, imagine that. That's like a Hab fan telling a Maple Leaf fan, you scored. You know. Others come from different parts of the city. One family from North York never knew Toronto had a waterfront. The father of this family, he was, quote unquote, blown away at how great it was and remembers as a boy coming to Ontario Place saying he wished there would be something there for his family. From Portland, Oregon, Portland, quote unquote, Portland doesn't have this kind of waterfront ride. From Copenhagen, a father wanted a step-through bike and his 2 sons wanted fixies. They left with the boys laughing at the father, saying he is riding a woman's bike. They returned, still poking fun at each other and showing a real interest in Ontario Place, saying they will go online to buy tickets for a concert that evening or something like that. From Amsterdam, a couple were visiting their expat children in Toronto. When they returned from the ride, they wanted to talk about Ontario Place. I told them what a marvel it was when it first opened and how people and some studies talk of reviving its futuristic design. When I inquired how Amsterdam cyclists could be so happy with riding anywhere else, they said they could get anywhere by bike in Amsterdam, but they don't have an Ontario Place on a waterfront trail like this. I hear rave reviews of our waterfront trail daily. Ontario Place, to me, is inextricable from the waterfront trail, so is the C&E. That's all a part of it. For us, people like, cyclists and those types of people, we don't see anything that is stopping us to go from one place to another. We're seeing our life unfolding. We're having a wonderful time. We're getting somewhere. It's great joy. It's family type of thing. We want to be able to go to all these places and not someone say, oh no, but you have to pay to get in here. And no, that's not a part of it. And it's different, you start hearing, oh, it's different kinds of government that run these places. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't care. I don't care who runs them. Are you making a life, or you're making a city for me, an everyday person, or are you making it for your whatever that is that you do up there? I think if the Martin Goodman Trail, I think if Ontario Place and the Martin Goodman Trail aren't treated as one, and if you do something really weird with Ontario Place, like putting up a tower or something dumb, it actually affects the entire waterfront trail. The whole thing, it's less of an enjoyable place to go. And for someone like me, 10, 20, 30, 40 kilometers is easy on a bicycle. That's joy for me, going 50 kilometers. It's not like, oh, you go 10 or you go 5, oh, we got to stop here, and I don't know, then you take this other route, and it's like you're destroying the entire thing. It's not just one part. That's what I got.
Thank you so much. I've lost my place. That was Ron or Arthur? Arthur. I apologize. Donna Patterson, and followed by Chanel and Sapo. Hi, Donna. You have 5 minutes.
I just wanted to say that I'm really worried that Ontario Place is at risk, and that especially that we may lose access to our waterfront. People from all over the world talk about how great our waterfront is. We all remember the giant yellow rubber duck that was brought to the Redpath Waterfront Festival as part of Canada 150, and how popular it was, and how many people took selfies with it that weekend. Ontario Place is iconic and has historical value, as the provincial government knows very well, even though they scrubbed it from their website. Ontario Place right now just needs a little TLC. Cinesphere was recently renovated and is drawing crowds to see movies again. Last year, during the Hot Docs Film Festival, the movie The Trolley was shown in IMAX to a sold-out crowd. And it was the perfect place to show The Trolley, a movie about the history of trolleys and streetcars and showcasing Toronto's own iconic streetcars. And who doesn't want to see the Harry Potter movies in IMAX at Cinesphere? Ontario Place has many events throughout the year that are drawing crowds. The Winter Light Exhibition, skating parties with DJs, live concerts, and events like the Mac and Cheese Festival. In fact, I read that more people went to Ontario Place last year than the CN Tower. Trillium Park, we've talked a lot about Trillium Park and the William G. Davis Trail that they opened in 2017. They have beautiful landscaping, trees, and fabulous Indigenous art. It's hugely popular, with many people walking and on bikes, enjoying it all year long. So what should Ontario Place be now? Not a casino, not a Ferris wheel, and not a mega mall. Ontario Place needs to be a place for all people of Ontario to enjoy. The possibilities are endless. What about a second science center, or a planetarium, or a beach? People have talked about the water. Torontonians flock to the water in the summertime, and we'd all love another beach, especially one at the waterfront. I'm very afraid that Ontario Place will be sold off to private interests, and that we will lose public, free access to Ontario Place. I'm worried that Trillium Park and the William G. Davis Trail might be torn down, and in its place, we might get a piece of grass in the middle of Ontario Place. If Ontario Place is privatized, the large number of walkers and cyclists who enjoy the park and trail now might lose their free access. And my biggest fear is that cyclists will lose free public access to the Martin Goodman Trail and the waterfront, and we may have to pay to get into Ontario Place. Ontario Place belongs to all of the people of Ontario. We need public consultations, and we need to keep Ontario Place free and accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? No? Chanel Candaya, followed by Sappho Mullins and Bruce Van Dyten. Any of those folks here? Chanel, Sappho, Bruce? Come on up. After Bruce, we will have Vivian Denton and Henry Gallas.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak at this committee. I think a lot of what's been said already, I'm covering ground that's been said, but I hope there's enough nuance here to make it worthwhile for you. So, my name is Bruce Van Dyten. I'm deputing as a concerned citizen. I am part of the Ossington Community Association, but I'm here on my own recognizance. Exhibition Place occupies approximately 190 acres of public land. Ontario Place comprises 52 publicly owned acres of surface land, and when including the water courses and marinas, the area rises to about 154 acres. Both venues sit on some of the most precious and beautiful land on the shore of Lake Ontario, conveniently accessible to millions of Ontarians. And the world beyond will celebrate this for generations to come. It is virtually impossible to foresee another time in the future when the opportunity will ever present itself again to break the silos that keep these two historically significant sites separate. This is the time to get it right. The current Exhibition Place 2017 to 2019 strategic plan and the now defunct Ontario Place Corporations Act, OPCA, both contain directives to maintain and enhance the cultural and heritage elements of the two sites. Additionally, both sites are required to integrate with the community, a community that has dramatically grown, as many people have pointed out, around the two sites. It is instructive to quote from a portion of the OPCA, which I will do now. The operation of Ontario Place is A, cultural, educational, research, public purposes. B, developing projects and programs designed to provide the people of Ontario with a greater appreciation of the province and its accomplishments and potential, and providing talented artists in the province with the opportunity to exhibit their works and their abilities. And C, developing special programs to enhance the image of the province. This vision is exactly why Trillium Park is the type of project that delivers on the founding vision of Ontario Place, and this is the time to get it right. Sustaining and building on this founding vision is the responsible way forward. First, it is fiscally responsible. The economic benefits of exemplary public spaces like people have pointed out, Central Park in New York or Millennium Park in Chicago, these are so widely known, recognized as to be beyond dispute. These parks generate economic spin-offs and benefits. With the right planning and with continued public access to the waterfront, Ontario Place with its landscaping and spectacular architecture can surpass even those brilliant locations. This is the time to build on those benefits. Secondly, it is fiduciarily, you guys try to say that, fiduciarily responsible. Ontario Place and Exhibition Place were built by the taxpayers and continue to be owned by the taxpayers. The two sites form a singular part of a civic, cultural, and heritage patrimony. Once gone, they'll never come back. We must apply due diligence and accountability as the taxpayers have a right to know and to be part of the consultation process. And that means, as people have said, a robust public consultation on both properties. We have the time to get it right. In recent years, the founding vision of both sites have become blurred, but this is not a reason to give up on the vision, rather to reassert it and strengthen it by, among other things, one, working with stakeholders to develop strategies for reigniting the two sites to contemporary relevance. Two, following through on the implementation of one of the many joint master plans with Exhibition Place. Three, adopt a joint transportation plan for Ontario Place and Exhibition Place, particularly reimagining the horrible expanse of asphalt parking lots at both attractions. And 4, appointing community members from the surrounding area to sit on the board or boards, as it may be, recognizing the intensification of the surrounding area and how consulting with this population explosion can animate these lands. There is time to create a new vision and to get it right. Now is the time to take a long view of these two sites. I have seen demographic predictions, and people have said we could be 4 million, 5 million people in 25 years. Where will all those people go for recreation and escape our hot summers? Eastern beaches serve us well, but they're on the other side of town. As in the other ones that serve us well, the downtown and Center Island areas are great. But the western beaches, starting with the West Island of Ontario Place and continuing through to the Humber, are simply our best option to offer your constituents unrestricted public access to the lake. There is time to get this right. I know as you do that the biggest challenge militating against a brilliant future for these two sites is the premier of this province. We can do little about his unique decision-based evidence-making process, which makes this a hard sell. So take as much time as you need to properly study this project. Take as much time as you want. Maybe you'll get distracted. We have the time to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vivienne Denton? No? Sorry, pardon me?
Hi, I'm Mariana G, and he's Henry G, and we're up now.
Ah, okay. Very good. 2 deputants for the price of 1.
We've got some awesome slides to show you as well, so
We can
please
get
bear with
them
us.
on.
Are we able to?
No, I can't.
What connection do you have?
It's a
HDMI?
micro HDMI. Yeah, that won't work.
No, we're doing good.
No, I'll have
Just
to.
need to run your...
Yeah. I'll see if this works.
Perhaps we'll take this moment to note that if you have a video presentation, please check with Mike first.
Got it, thank you.
I can't make it work.
I think we're okay, we'll just show the photos.
Yeah.
No videos, just photos. Anyway, councillors, thank you so much. My name is Mariana Golubovich. My colleague here, Henry Gallis, and I are here to represent Toronto Slackline, but generally the community who loves play and movement as a whole. You see, we promote slacklining because our aim is to get people outside playing in parks and discovering what their bodies are capable of before their bodies are no longer capable of doing anything. And so what we discovered by playing in our beautiful city parks is namely Trinity Bellwoods, which is the only spot in the city where we can actually slackline legally, is that we discovered all these other activities such as climbing, juggling, acro yoga, parkour, and calisthenics. And these represent a growing trend in movement and play. So as a physical education teacher with the TDSV and an executive board member of the Toronto District Elementary Sports Association, I can tell you that children are fascinated by these creative and independent forms of play. And really, Toronto has a multitude of purpose-built parks for many ball sports, skateboarding, BMX, and we feel that it's time for slacklining and these other emerging sports to be given an opportunity to be presented to the public as they are growing in Europe.
Ontario Place was once a playground fostering a diverse range of activities with a recreational focus. We would like to see Ontario Place retain that spirit of play, but combined with healthy, physical, recreational activity to provide people with easy access to exciting sport, but would also require very minimal expense to develop and maintain. Having such a centre in the city's heart would benefit Toronto citizens by encouraging a healthy lifestyle, promote a wide range of emerging sports and activities, and provide an opportunity to find a better balance in our work and lives.
A lot of our current playground structures in our city parks are really limited in the age range that they provide amusement or challenge to. Our small and basic playscapes are either very, very basic or they just require a lot of equipment for people to participate, such as baseball or soccer. And so a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of cities in Europe have recognized that these trends are getting people of all ages and all abilities out to play. So recently in Warsaw, Poland, I was walking by the riverside and I saw built-in trampolines into the ground. There was a tent provided by the city that had hula hoops and indo boards, which are a balance board that you stand on, slack racks. Do we have those photos?
No.
Okay. We'll send you the photos
Provide
via
them
email.
afterwards, yes.
Wonderful. And,
get me a
and,
slap.
and, so, and everybody was involved. It wasn't just children, it was parents, it was their grandparents. And it was beautiful because it was people enjoying the amazing spaces that their city had to offer for them. And so, please continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, Ontario Place is ripe with potential to be transformed into state-of-the-art playground spaces for these emerging sports. The water space in and around the pods is ideal for calm water-based activities such as stand-up paddleboarding. Zip lines and trekking courses could be easily rigged all around the grounds from the pods. The indoor facilities could be repurposed as other movement and training facilities such as rock climbing, parkour, gymnastics, and more. It would also serve as fantastic spaces to foster community growth.
So the existing structures are also perfect for an elite recreational focus. We had a photo to send that we wanted to show everybody of a high line that was rigged from the Eiffel Tower. In Bern, Switzerland, they have a slackline festival, which is the largest slackline festival in the world. And they have 58 lines that they put in a campground that is open to everyone in the city. And then they have another line that they set over the river that people can try to walk on. And this is the type of thing that would be amazing for casual onlookers. It would be amazing as a draw for international athletes. And these pods don't really require anything other than people like us who are knowledgeable about these things and are willing to share that knowledge to rig these lines, to host these incredible international events that are happening all over the United States, South America, Europe, and even Japan.
Having these extreme sports at Ontario Place would be nothing new. They were bungee jumping attractions over the water outside the pods in the 1990s. I'm glad that we saw the video of the children's village. That was some great nostalgia for me. When I was a child, I saw Cirque du Soleil IMAX movies at the Cinesphere. Now we have an opportunity to build a training space to hone these exact talents, and it's waiting there just to be built.
And what's beautiful about these activities is that they're so accessible, they're so simple for anyone to get involved and do at the basic level, that we wouldn't only be building playgrounds for children. We wouldn't only be building a playscape similar to what Ontario Place had once upon a time that I enjoyed as a child. But it would be something for parents to do while their children were on the playground instead of looking at their phones or waiting for their hockey practice or soccer practice to end. And the issues that we've had as slackliners in Ontario is that despite it having an extremely wonderful safety record, is that we can't rig them to trees. It's a sport that gets us outside. We've been in contact with Councillor Layton on this matter, and then Doug Ford shook up everything here, and that kind of was put on the back burner. But these are growing trends because they're completely inclusive. There's nothing exclusionary in terms of how they're played. There's nothing cost prohibitive about them. And in the email that we send you, you'll see a major parkour park in the center of Berlin that is open to all. And these are the growing trends of the future. As a physical education teacher, I can tell you that kids just don't go out and play baseball unless it's an organized league. They don't go out and play soccer unless it's an organized league. I used to travel to different basketball courts throughout the city, and I don't see anybody using those anymore.
Wrap things up, okay?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm going to wrap things up, okay?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
By creating a slackline-friendly space, in addition to outfitting it for other physical activity sports, Ontario Place could easily be a cost-effective and prudent solution to the developing situation for the benefit and the health and well-being of Torontonians and Ontarians. Toronto Slackline is eager to work with any and all willing organizations and officials who share our vision to revitalize Ontario Place as a center of healthy recreational activity and athleticism for everyone. Whatever the future of Ontario Place may be, we envision that a space in line with the values of healthy activity, community, and sustainability, all in balance, would be best for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions? No? Thank you so much for coming out tonight. The next three people I have are David Clarke, Irving Shaw, and John Wilson. David? Yes. That's you. That's me. We were in the other room. Well, someone should go tell them that we're emptying out. Oh, okay. They're coming now. All right.
Is there pictures from you guys to look at?
You know what? So that everyone can see them. David? You put them on that device there. Everyone can see. Ah, the room's filling up again. Welcome.
I brought a lot of the younger people attending the meeting today with me. How do I work this?
Just put them on, face up, as if you were looking at them. See? Oh. Magic.
Okay, so briefly before I do my presentation, I'm going to show you some pictures. But my name is David Clarke, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the members of Toronto Urban Fishing Ambassador. So this is the Riverwalk Fish Habitat. This is a fishing node at Ontario Place. It hasn't been talked about in today's speeches. It was put together in 2008. The Riverwalk Fish Habitat and recreational fishing nodes were built at Ontario Place by the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, Toronto Waterfront Revitalization Corporation, and Ontario Place. In 2009 and 2010, family fishing events were held at the Riverwalk Fish Habitat and recreational fishing nodes of Ontario Place. So here's some pictures of that event. So you can see the families and the kids fishing at the nodes. These are called nodes. They're the hard rock platforms there for people to fish off of. There were close to 1,000 people that day. You can see the lineup at the top of the picture. It went up all the way up to the what is now the Budweiser stage. Now this happened 3 years in a row, but this was the one that was put on by Dave Mercer from Facts of Fishing. He's now the host of the Bassmaster Elite Series in the United States and Canada, big fishing. So all the people who came in the room with me all have pictures of fish they caught there. I'm just going to use an example. This was caught last year, largemouth bass. There's great fish habitat there as well as places to recreationally fish. Okay, so I'll move quickly forward with this. In 2011, Ontario Place closed and access was restricted. This ended the family fishing events at Ontario Place and the use of the resource, fish habitat and fishing nodes that Toronto and the province had invested in. 2017 to 2018, Ontario Place reopened and supported recreational fishing. February 2019, recreational anglers fishing the north shore of Ontario Place were warned by security that fishing was no longer allowed at Ontario Place, and if they continued to fish, police would be summoned. March 1st, 2019, Toronto Urban Fishing Ambassador received confirmation that a decision was made by Ontario Place management to prohibit recreational fishing at Ontario Place, including Trillium Park, William G. Davis Trail, and the Riverwalk Fish Habitat fishing nodes. I spoke directly to the manager there. I have her name, etc. I just don't want to make it public for the protection of her. Responsible licensed recreational anglers are now prohibited from fishing public waters from public lands at Ontario Place. Public consultation, there wasn't. Public notice, there wasn't. Signage, there wasn't. Under what legal grounds was this decision made and to be enforced? So I asked that question, and she had to go back and get an answer for me. And I asked why. She didn't have an answer for me, but then she came back to me and said the marina manager at Ontario Place had told them that the port and harbor practices procedures, rule number 24, no person shall fish from shoreline unless in an authorized area designated by posted signs, would be the reason why. Now, this was used back in 2012 to ban fishing in the inner harbor, and we went through a whole process, and our champion, Councillor Paula Fletcher, got a motion passed through City Council to reinstate fishing, and then we have some other champions here, Councillor Layton and Councillor Cressy, who moved that even forward with the paddling motion. It was paddling and recreational fishing node motion to establish more access points for fishing and paddling across the city. So in 2012, through a public press release Ports Toronto declared that it fully supported recreational fishing, that the historical purpose of the regulation was to protect people from the industrial and commercial ships in the Port of Toronto decades past, and that very few examples of its use were relevant now. Ports Toronto stated that Rule 24 was only authorized to be used and enforced by Ports Toronto and Ports Toronto staff, not the City of Toronto, not City of Toronto parks, marinas, or police.
Okay, David, I'm going to ask if you have a final thought.
I'm on my final.
Very good, thank you.
The context to prohibit recreational fishing at Ontario Place is unfounded, without merit, and not within the laws of the three levels of government. Yet responsible licensed anglers are being interfered with, criminalized, and their rights as licensed anglers and public park users compromised. Let me be clear, this is contrary to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Act. In our living city, rather than being restrictive or prohibitive, we must strive to promote engagement in natural park spaces like Ontario Place through recreational activities such as fishing. Toronto Urban Fishing Ambassador members are hoping to have a quick resolution to regaining complete access to Ontario Place for recreational fishing. Members of Toronto Urban Fishing Ambassadors strongly believe that the master plan for Ontario Place must support and promote recreational fishing use of the Riverwalk fish habitat fishing nodes that our city and province invested in. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very large and persuasive final thought. Councillor Fletcher has a question for you.
Almost as large as his largemouth bass, which was quite a nice catch, David. Tell me a little bit about all of the fishing organizations. You're the urban fishing. Are there others? I remember there's a big fishing group somehow in the GTA or something.
Well, we have a GTA Fishing Summit, so the Sportsman Show, the Chinese Anglers Association, the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, the Ministry of Natural Resources, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Credit Valley Conservation are all part of that. We meet at least once a year. I'm on internet with them just about every week. I've paid $140,000 out of my pocket since 2012 to run the family fishing events in the City of Toronto and to do environmental work. Our volunteers, we come out and volunteer to teach family fishing events. They do shoreline cleanups. We are personally, as a group, invested in this. And that is why we get such support from Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, Ministry of Natural Resources, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. When the TRCA was finding the Asian carp, it was our members that were spotting those Asian carp and calling the TRCA down to electrofish them. We are the eyes and ears by fishing the waterfront for the many conservation groups and the Ministry of Natural Resources.
And when is the Sportsman Show? Is that happening?
That's coming up this coming week, just like the last time fishing was banned in the city. It was right during the Sportsman Show when Dave Chong was charged. All the same players are all aware of what's going on.
Weren't they? Dave Chong from the Chinese Anglers, was he charged?
He's a professional angler, bass angler. So I was just sitting with him this week. We were doing a thing with kids. He's constantly active in it still. He's not too happy right now. So we just found out Friday. So this meeting was an appropriate time to come and say, hey, all these guys fish. We have 2,300 active members on our Facebook site for Toronto. And when we do events, we get about 50 to 60 volunteers out. And we do our best to teach kids. We've done events at Toronto Islands for 850 kids in one day. We do smaller events for 150 kids. Sometimes we've done 30 kids who have autism or are physically challenged and are in wheelchairs, etc. Last year, we partnered with another group. We took five groups of 140 kids from gun crime neighborhoods, from Toronto community housing, out to Bird's Trout Pond, and they all went home with rainbow trout already cleaned that they caught themselves. They caught family dinner and took it home in a bag with ice in it from Bird's Trout Pond. That was a very expensive venture, but it was worth it. And you almost come home with tears from doing that because you feel so proud of the work you do.
Thank you so much, David, for all you do.
Thank you for what you do, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Next, I have Irving Shaw, then John Wilson, and Terry Honor. Irving? Irving? No? John? Hi, John. After John will be Terry Honor and Mary Hines.
Thank you. I am here as the co-chair of the West Islands Committee, but having come just after the last speaker, I just wanted to point out that I actually was one of the founders of the Salmon Festival in Morningside Park in Scarborough, and I'm pretty proud of that, and it kind of segues into where I wanted to go with what I want to say to you today. I hope that you push back at the province on over-commercialization and monetization of Ontario Place. And the reason I am convinced that Ontario Place should remain a public parkland, public for all. I am also involved with Ontario Place for All. And the critical point is that Ontario Place is a real node for a system, for a city-wide parkland system that really adds to the city's vitality and frankly adds to its economic vitality. My friend Suzanne Cavanaugh spoke previously about the work that has been done and presented to the city by HR&A consultancy on the economic value of parkland in two cities. This is not something that registers necessarily at the ticket counter at our parks, but it does create vitality for our city and underpins the economic vitality of our city, the desirability of our city to come to and to live in and to do business in and so on. So as far as Ontario Place itself is concerned, of course, we know where it is, but I think we need to remember the network of parkland that it is a key part of. The network that goes all the way along the waterfront from Etobicoke Creek to Rouge River, from Scarborough Bluffs to Mimico and beyond, and also up the river valleys as well. And at Ontario Place, of course, we're quite close to and very easy to access the Humber River Trail system that goes up into the 905 area, up to the Oak Ridges Moraine, as well as the local network of the Lost River of Garrison Creek, which links Ontario Place to the Old Fort York, Stanley Park, Toronto Bellwoods Park, Trinity Bellwoods Park, Bickford Park, Christie Pitts, High Hillcrest Park, and so on. So all of these assets for our city, places where people live, are very desirable places to live because of the wonders of the parkland system that links through them in a very significant way. I trust that you are keeping these factors in mind as we have ongoing discussions with the province over the vitality, the feasibility of maintaining Ontario Place as a public parkland, as a place where all can come and visit, as a place which has a wide variety of activities, whether it may be fishing, whether it may be the slackline or other activities of that sort, which are accessible to all. There may be some fees, obviously, for many things that happen at Ontario Place, as there always has been. However, those factors don't contradict the fact that it is a place in a park, in a system of parks across the city and networking through the city that make our city strong and vital.
Thank you. Questions? No? Thank you so much for your time this evening. Terry Honor. Hi, Terry, come on up. After Terry will be Mary Hines and Noel Hewitt. Terry, you have 5 minutes, and there's a clock over here to my right.
Thank you. I won't be long. I'd just like to say thank you so much for letting me have the opportunity to speak, because Ontario Place is very important to me. I am a boater at the Ontario Place Marina, and my family has been seasonal boaters since 1998. We've been part of the Ontario Place community when the park was busy, when it shut down, and since it's reopened to the public. I have to personally tell you that the best time was when there was a lot of people. I would like to see a lot more people come back to the park. At the Ontario Place Marina, there's a mix of boats. There's power boats, sailboats, large boats, small boats. My family has a 21-foot sailboat, small, so we maintain it ourselves. And the reason we've been at Ontario Place for so long is, one, because it's affordable, and two, because it has excellent access to the water. During this time, I've had really great experiences. In the year 2000, I was a student working at the X, so I would get my Tim Hortons and muffin that is been shut down for a long time. There was the Symphony of Fire. We had great years watching the fireworks, and the park would be packed. There were water slides, there's a theater, and I'm told by boaters who were there before me that there were restaurants and pubs and live music, and that it was a really great place to be in the day. So what I just came here to say today is that Ontario Place is a great place where I've made memories with my family and friends, and it has the potential to be a waterfront destination enjoyed by the people who live and visit Toronto. The one thing I would say is it definitely needs better accessibility by transportation, because it's hard to get to walking, and even if you did have a car, the parking's pretty expensive. So I would love to see it restored and improved as a barrier-free public space for people who don't have access to cottages or waterfront. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mary, come on up. Next will be Noel Hewitt, and then Blanca S. Hi, Mary.
Hello. Okay, to start with, I'm going to say I do not live, nor have I ever lived, within the Toronto East York Community Council boundary. So this area, this Ontario Place is not just for the downtowners. I do remember the Children's Water Park, especially, because it was one of the few places where my disabled son, he's cerebral palsy and he's autistic, and he could play there. And there were very few places that he could play. I remember the Cinesphere, the concerts at the Forum. It was a wonderful place. And gradually, as it became more and more commercialized, my family and I went there fewer and fewer times. I really don't remember the last time I was there, except to walk past as I was walking along the waterfront, along the highway park. What I'm envisioning is a year-round facility for outdoor education and the environment, history. Take a page from the Biodome. We can have our friendly raccoons, the plants that live in the area, the prairie plants that we are trying to bring back. We could have classes during the day for kids of all ages, but I can see it also being used by adults. It's not just a place for children. We need a building, at least one building, that can be warm or air-conditioned in the summer so that people can get away from the elements. But I can see it being used for everything. I mean, some people talked about slack lines, a ropes course. We could actually let children be wild again, and we can let adults be wild again. We can have a history place where all our history. I'm sorry you don't like that, but I believe in wilding children. I was a teacher for many, many years. I've taught everything from preschool to adults, and I know that this is a place that everyone can use. It's a place where we can learn about the original peoples that were here. We can learn our whole history. This could be a place, we have a lake. Most people don't even know what's there. We can get connected back to the lake. During the year, yes, kids could be coming in groups from different schools, and then in the summer, the recreational facilities would attract people from around everywhere. I mean, I can remember people coming from all sorts of places. I brought family there from New York to come to visit the Ontario Place, and we went to the restaurants, we walked around, and they were just thrilled with it. And now I'm not sure I would bring anybody there, because there's just such a small area that is useful, and it's so far away to get to with the transit. So we definitely need some kind of transportation to get there, perhaps buses for now, and some type of RT system eventually. So I certainly think that there's a great deal of future for Ontario Place. Please, please, please fight tooth and nail to keep it. Yes, there should be some planning that includes the CNE, but the CNE is a very different kind of place. So I think it has room for more buildings and such. So perhaps that would be where we can put some housing that we need for accessible housing and housing for people with many people. And I think that's all I want to say at this point, unless there's some questions.
No, thank you so much, Mary. Noel Hewitt. Hi, Noel. And after Noel will be Blanca and Ian Wheel.
Thank you for taking the time to hear from, I guess, everybody here. I'm here, my name's Noel Hewitt. I'm here to speak on behalf of Toronto Sport and Social Club. I'm here really just to echo a lot of the same statements a lot of other people have been saying here. As far as the availability of recreational space goes in the city, it is limited. We have our spring and summer programming about to open right now, and I can attest that we have a massive wait list. Once this programming opens, we have a huge wait list of Toronto residents that are trying to get involved in these programs that can. We just don't have the space available to take advantage of this. As we've spoken to with Councillor Costa before, he can obviously attest that this is something our organization is really committed to helping the City of Toronto develop here. And we are behind this 100%, whatever we can do as an organization to help increase the availability of recreational opportunities for adults. And this goes across, I've heard people talking about slacklining, I've heard others just talking about trying to get people active. As it's mentioned before, we are a city that has a population that's looking to double in the next 20 years, but we're not doubling our green spaces. So we have to take advantage of what we have available right now. And as far as Ontario Place goes, this is the perfect opportunity for us to be able to make sure that we can keep people playing games, keep people active, and keep people healthy. I don't want to take up a lot of you guys' time. I know you guys have been here for a really late night, but this is really what I'm just wanting to get across here. We really feel here at Toronto Sport and Social Club that the #1 usage of this is to take this beautiful scenery and make sure that it's a great recreational space.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful. Blanca? Hi, Blanca. Come on up. And after Blanca, we're going to have Ian Wheel and Dorothy Tidman.
Yes, my name is Blanca. My son is 24 years old, and since he was born, we went to Ontario Place. We love it. But I also work now part-time at TTC, and I also take public transit. So I'm quite aware of the problems that TTC has. And if those problems are not taken care of, this is affecting everything. I've been every summer in the main area going to Ontario Place. And the accidents in cyclists, I don't have the statistics, somebody must have them. And every year, especially in the last year, it's been really going downhill. To the point now, every day, somebody's walking on the tracks. Every day, there are delays. Every day, people go without paying. This is going backwards. It is affecting everything. People are going to be discouraged to go cycling to get to Ontario Place. There are going to be more accidents. I see it. You have to go like this to cross some streets. You shouldn't have to be stressed out. It should be simple, red or a green, and you cross. No, you cannot do that. You have to go like this. And then now they make the noise, the streetcars, because otherwise you can hear them. So safety also for people. It becomes very stressful. Older people, people with disabilities, families with children, with strollers, please pay attention. You must have your people that are in charge. Yes, TTC has a whole structure, but it is not working out. They need help. Please send the help to them because we will see more accidents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have 3 people left, Ian Wheel, Dorothy Tidman, and Catherine Tate. Ian?
Yes.
Hi, come on up.
My name is Ian Wheel, and I've led walks in the area, and I'm very familiar with Liberty Village and Ontario Place and Exhibition Place, although I've not led that many walks there. But I did work down there for Irwin Toy for 3.5 years, and also for CAMH for Dr. Cyril Greenland for 6 months. So I've spent roughly over 4 years in the 1990s down there, and of course have been a visitor and frequenter on bike, walking, and occasionally car of the area. Now, one thing you may not know is there was once a tavern called the Cycle Tavern or the Cycle Inn in Swansea, and people used to commute from Exhibition by bike to the Cycle Tavern and back and forth. There was also lots of concentration and connection with the C&E or Exhibition Place prior to Ontario Place, and the TDC in 1932 opened a streetcar loop, a new loop, direct to the C&E. And that was in existence for some 70 years. So improvement in transportation and possibly a new TDC connection would be desirable. Now, the other interesting thing is with regard to the Indigenous people were there before anybody else, and the reference to Northern Ontario and north of Superior is quite well sounding, but they never did get proper schooling outdoors in the Toronto area. And residential schools was something that they were consigned to, and it might be desirable to have an outdoor school or an Indigenous school in Ontario Place. And also to emphasize education and swimming and water. And of course, paying attention to the famous swimmers, Marilyn Bell, the Mighty Mouse, and of course the more recent one, Penny Alesiak. And perhaps some reference to swimming would be desirable. It would also be desirable to have better access for bikes and for transportation, including possibly new trails to High Park and other parks beyond in the area. So improvement in connections is very important. And also it should be noted that Liberty Street goes back 140 years and was generally thought to be named after the Statue of Liberty, but in fact it was drawn up by people from the penitentiary in Jeffersonville, Indiana, and Thomas Jefferson designed that. So the connection of liberty and the fact that the United States did play a role, I think something that most people are not aware of. So summing it all up, I would say having an all-weather connection, something like Seattle and Tacoma, Washington have, where they have piers that are open all year round, no matter what the weather. And so an all-weather connection, I think, is desirable as well. That's about all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Dorothy? Dorothy Tidman? No? Catherine Tate? Hi, Catherine. Grab a seat. You have 5 minutes, and you can watch your time up here to my right.
Thank you. I'm going to use the projector. I made
You
my,
just put it on face up as if you were reading it. Yeah.
I made my parents go through their old.
Oh.
So I think they spent all of last weekend taking a really long trip down memory lane. About that, I just wanted to say I'm a resident of Ward 11, and I live 3 kilometers away. But when I was young, we didn't live in the city. We came down to Ontario Place from Markham. And these are photos of me and my cousins. And my cousins lived in Huntsville and Burlington. So this was a meeting place. We didn't live in the city. We were coming to the city to come to Ontario Place. So I'm a mom now, and I would love for Ontario Place to be a place where my little one can go and hang out with his cousins, and for it to still be that kind of meeting place where families can get together. In addition to being a mom, I'm also a designer. I studied design at OCAD. So I wrote a lovely little design brief here because every large project has to start with a design brief. But considering the time, I really just want to pick a couple of things out of it. We're in a global biodiversity crisis. And you can read more about that, it's in the news. I think whatever use or reuse there is of this site should allow for habitat. And we're also in a global climate crisis. And so I think that whatever reimagining of the site and the buildings that are there should not only be low emissions, but or emission neutral, but negative emissions. So it's a site that could host a lot of green space, and so and in various ways, the site could be made to be low impact. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Mike, you have a question?
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Layton has a question.
Thank you very much. Catherine, it's great to see you, and congratulations. I don't think I've seen you since you've had your little one. I just wanted to say thanks for coming tonight, and please thank your mom for pulling up those pictures. I think for a lot of us, it brought us down memory lane a little bit.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that concludes the listed deputants. I am going to make a call. Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a deputation on this item and didn't register? Please, sir, come on forward. Sir?
We closed the list.
Oh, you closed the list?
Yeah, we closed the
Oh,
list.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm filling in for Councillor Cressy here, who's really the chair. So you're going to see some amateur mistakes. I understand that the deputation list was formally closed at a certain point of time, so I'm afraid I can't call additional deputants. I'll come over and talk to you after. Okay. So, Councillor Layton, are there any questions of staff from members of the committee? Seeing none, I'm going to invite the chair to speak first.
Well, thank you. And let me begin by placing a motion on the screen, which I'll speak to, so I can formally place the motion. But first of all, to the nearly 60 people who are still in the room and the hundreds who attended, I want to thank you for coming out and for your passion and your comments and your thoughtful feedback into the future of these vital lands. And there have been many rounds of applause for members of the public who spoke tonight. We have probably 30 City of Toronto staff members who have been here listening and taking notes throughout, and I'd ask the public to give them a round of applause on my right for being here. Really, when we form a new subcommittee and announce that the meeting will begin at 5:30, it's not always easy, and so I want to thank members of the public service for here. The motion in front of us here directs 4 specific things. The first is for our Director of Community Planning and our city staff to come forward to the April meeting of Toronto and East York Community Council with a fulsome report on principles that the City of Toronto, ultimately, we will be asking City Council to endorse as it relates to the revitalization of Ontario Place, and for those principles to also take into account the substance of the deputations we heard tonight. The second direction is to consult with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. They have filed a formal claim over the Ontario Place lands, and they have filed that claim, as we heard, with the province. The third item in here is to evaluate the inclusion of Ontario Place in the city's heritage registrar. We know it is already included for cultural heritage in the province. And the fourth is to ensure that there is an integrated and coordinated master planning framework both for Exhibition Place and Ontario Place together. As we've heard tonight, Ontario Place is 155 acres of public land. And it was established as an urban public space for all Ontarians, and we only get one chance to revitalize it. And so I truly believe that it's critical that we get it right. And so the question of who is in charge and who has a say in revitalizing it, we know that the province owns the majority of the land, and we know that the province is undertaking its process. But the city is a player here, not just as a partial landowner, but in servicing and infrastructure, in questions of transit, in integration with an Exhibition Place. And so the province cannot go alone. The province has to work with the city. Not only should they work, but they have to work with the city. And so while the province has announced their intention to reimagine Ontario Place, I think it's the obligation of the City of Toronto and us to ensure that Torontonians have a say, that the Mississaugas of the Credit have a say, and that our city has a say. And so this process here today, this is part of moving to the next phase, which is to establish our city's principles. And our city's principles to include Exhibition Place. Priorities, many of which I think we've heard here tonight. Public access, connection to the waterfront, heritage preservation, expanded parkland. We know what it could be. We also know what it shouldn't be, and that being a mega mall and no casino. And so I will simply close by saying that Ontario Place, we may be here at the City of Toronto as a subcommittee, but it truly belongs to all Ontarians. Its future, therefore, must be decided by Ontarians, and we cannot collectively allow the future of Ontario Place, this gem in our city and our province, to be decided solely in the back rooms and Doug Ford's boardrooms. And with that, I'll close my remarks and thank you once again to the fellow committee members and members of staff and all of you for attending.
Anyone else to speak? Yeah, sure. So I don't have an awful lot to say except that I happen to be just of the correct age that I can remember going as a very young child to the opening. And I can remember taking my kids. So I'm in that rare generation that got 2 generations worth of fun out of it before they started disinvesting. This evening, hearing all the stories about the past, all the hopes for the future, all the conversation about the current uses of Ontario Place, I'm reminded that it's one of those rare and unique public places where we collectively dream about who we are. And I want to thank you for all coming out this evening to remind me of that. and to remind each other of that so that we can go forward with the project of making sure that that space is reclaimed by the public for, so that future generations can dream who Ontarians are together. Thank you for conveying that to me tonight. Councillor Fletcher.
I'll just pick up on what you said, Gordon. Yes, kind of that nostalgia of going there and all those pictures that you brought. Thank you so much with my kids and going down all of those big slides. That was fun. And our memories, there's a lot of memories, and I think Torontonians and people in Ontario probably have a lot of memories. They probably have a lot of pictures. And I think showing the pictures of the great times, of family times at Ontario Place was really important tonight and probably really important as we go forward, besides all the zoning and the heritage and everything else, which I certainly support all of these motions. But tonight we just heard what real people do in a real place. And thinking about how this place could have been closed, imagine this 70 acres of land and the rest of water, closing down this gem on our waterfront. It's unbelievable. And perhaps because it's divided by the lake shore, and to the north is this vast, kind of empty most of the time X place, that we don't think of it as a park or a place to go or just naturally easy to get to. But really, we're reminded of the importance of this credible, strategic location on the waterfront. And there's only one waterfront. There's only so much shoreline. There's only so much water's edge. And here it is in front of us today. I can only compare this 70 acres of land with the 75 acres of parkland that we're building for the Villiers Island, around Villiers Island, very consciously making sure we're reclaiming the waterfront and building a new park rather than closing it down and having everybody very concerned about what it might be. And I fully support looking at the relationship between Exhibition Place and Ontario Place. They are two solitudes at the moment, but I really want to make sure that we don't end up with a corporatized version of Ontario Place and Exhibition Place. That would be the worst if that happened, rather than a place on the waterfront that draws people where we feel it belongs to us. And everybody tonight that spoke truly reminded me, and I'm sure everyone else, we feel that that belongs to us. And somehow it got closed, and we might not have noticed. We didn't have a meeting about the closing of Ontario Place, but now we're meeting because we're just not sure what's going to happen when it reopens. And I want to say that for people that love water sports, all the ideas for swimming, they are great. This swimming pier idea is fantastic. And the fishing that goes on the water, we don't realize the amount of fishing and the number of fishers that there are in the city of Toronto. And there's only so many places to fish. You can't fish up on the 401. You can't fish on the 407. You can only fish on the water's edge. So I'm very inspired by everyone here tonight. I've learned so much, and I just want to thank everybody, as others here on our committee have, to say thank you for coming out. And this is just the beginning, I think, of recapturing this Ontario Place, our place.
Thank you. Councillor Layton?
You can cast right off a bridge down into the Humber, though, and get your fish. No? Right off the 401? No? Humber joke? Come on, it's not just Lake Ontario. You can get
all right.
fish. But
okay.
there's really nothing like a fire sale to really get people reacting and realizing what they love in our city. And we've seen this before, surprisingly enough, conducted by the brother of our premier. When we were scrambling to look at the things that we've valued and cherished most as a city as they were in danger and under threat. And I remember back in 2011 when they closed Ontario Place, when the provincial government closed Ontario Place, I was a local councillor at the time, and we struggled to work with the OPSU, who was organizing around the issue. There was an Institute of Designers. Ken, you may have been part of that, where we went to the Martin Prosperity Institute and had a day-long charrette with all these brilliant minds from Toronto and Ontario to come up with what is the next iteration. Zeidler was there and gave a presentation, which was pretty remarkable. And some of the same themes, like I tell you, some of the same themes were incredibly consistent with what we talked about today, with the notion of water being a focal point, with music and the return of the free entertainment and cultural piece, with food and with sports. All of these were key themes that came up with a group full of hand-picked experts by the University of Toronto Martin Prosperity Institute. The sad thing is, it fell on deaf ears. We produced a report, and the government of the time was saying, well, no, we don't know what we're going to do. And then what happened, besides a fight against a casino that happened shortly after, which we won, and Doug Ford voted against, which I'll remind him on every occasion when I get to talk about this. What happened was the minister responsible for the file just kept turning over, and we actually never got a chance to really have a conversation with someone in authority at the province. We did, though, get agreement from the province that it should be the City of Toronto doing the master plan for the site. So the city went out and got money to do a land bridge environmental assessment as part of the Canada 150 funding, and someone is going to have to explain to me how it has some kind of relevance to our country's birthday. But we got the money to do it, to look at what these connections are to improve them. But again, and as part of that was this master plan. Again, though, I'll say that it's nothing like a fire sale to get us all realizing that we really need to do some of this work a lot faster and bring forward some of these ideas quicker, because it's been a couple years. You know, we all have enormous amounts on our plate, and it's no wonder our prioritization gets changed to deal with the immediate rather than get out ahead of issues. Like, I think that's what we struggle with at times, and part of that is a funding issue. But I'm glad that this focus has returned on this important site. And I have my own memories, like we saw the pictures of. I look forward to sharing some of those memories with my daughters, because I have great faith that as a city and as a province, we'll be able to convince the provincial government, as well as the powers here at the city, that this is something worth not only protecting, but rather than take the position that our last government did and say, we don't want to put any money in, we've got to start realizing, in order to have these nice things, we got to start investing in our city and in our infrastructure. Thank you.
So with that, I guess we have the motion in front of us from Councillor Cressy. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Why, it's unanimous. All those opposed? None. And that concludes the business that we have this evening.
Can I just thank Councillor Cressy for all of his work in
Yes.
pulling all this
Thank you to Joe for all the work he did to put this
Really
together.
appreciate that.
So, have a great evening.
Thank you, guys.